All right, I'm now joined by the People's Economics professor, Rob Larson. I actually just got back from being not too far away from your part of the country, I think. You're muted, Rob.
Sorry. Yes, you traveled through our fine airport.
That's right. I think I posted a picture of that. I was learning how to be an anti-racist. I had a lot of fun. Got to spend a weekend with some friends from This Is Revolution because I was going to one of their weddings. We have missed, because of that trip. We missed. Didn't do a breakdown last Thursday or an episode this last Monday. But I'm excited to get back into it and to watch something that's like truly strange that it even exists. This is a 2014 debate entitled "Where Did the Future Go?" between Peter Thiel and David Graeber somehow.
Yeah, incredible. I've never even heard of this one. Ben, when you first showed it to me, I remember thinking, oh my. Yeah, it's a sleeper Battle of the Titans, I guess. Who knows? We'll all enjoy it now.
Yeah, exactly. I do want to set this up a little bit, but first, this is a little bit off topic, but it's related to the larger topic of the series, and I enjoyed it. We'll I'm sure, show some version of this clip at the beginning of the episode on Monday, but this happened actually just before. It was the day that Jean Bajalan showed up at my place, so we could go to Canada together. So it took me a while to start watching the actual event itself. But on last Thursday, our friend Anna Kasparian had a conversation with Dennis Prager, and I just want to play a minute from the beginning of that conversation because I really enjoyed this.
I wanted to just kind of start off with, I guess, disagreeing with the notion that the left is afraid to have these kinds of discussions or debates. In fact, you had tweeted that video that we started this conversation with, and there were a lot of responses from prominent individuals on the left. I want to give you a few examples, starting with Vosh, who's a big Twitch streamer. He's got a big YouTube channel as well. He says, "You couldn't be more wrong. I love spirited debate in the free marketplace of ideas." He even provided his email and would love to have that conversation with you. My good friend, Ben Burgis, also responded. He's a great guy. He says, "Hi, Dennis. I'd be delighted to chat with you either on my show, or you could host it through PragerU, or I'm sure Modern Day Debate or some other neutral platform would be happy to host it." And on multiple occasions, I noticed that Sam Cedar would also love to debate you. So he responded in that tweet as well, saying available, and adding Tim Pool knows what lengths he would go to not even be on the same stage as me, right, Tim? So there's some drama with Tim Pool, but just wanted to let you know you don't have to ache anymore. There are lots of people on the left who want to debate you.
He sort of goes on to say, well, I still think as a general rule or whatever, but anyway, maybe
a long list of opposing examples. I don't even have to, state a limit to my claim. I just still think it's just my opinion that it's true.
Yeah. It's like the media version of Ronald Reagan going on TV and saying that 6 months ago, he told the American people he did not trade arms for hostages. And in his heart, he still believes that to be true.
That's great stuff, man. Kasparian is in a class by herself.
Yeah, no, for sure. Speaking of which, if you want to see, I should say, before we get to the main subject for tonight, if you want to see Anna, you want to see Nando Vila, you want to see those This Is Revolution guys I got to see this last weekend. That'd be Jason Miles and Cuba Rzinski. who are both going to be there. If you want to see Matt Leck and David Griscom from Left Reckoning, you want to see Daniel Bessner, Ryan Lake, and C. Derek Varn. All of those people are going to be at this event in Los Angeles on October 23rd at the Terragram Ballroom. And that's at 7 p.m. LA time. So if you live anywhere near Los Angeles and you want to go to that, tickets are available now, and the link is available in the description for this stream. Should check that out. Should be a lot of fun.
That's a hell of a bill. That's a great show value.
And I should also say that what Anna is what Anna is reading Sam Cedar obliquely referring to about Tim Pool. I don't know if I should say that on air, but I do know that story. So if anybody wants to show up to LA and get a drink at the the bar at the Terragram, I'll be happy to fill your ear with those details.
Oh wow!
But yeah, I haven't gotten my $10,000 to debate Dennis Prager, despite the fact that I took up his invitation. I don't know if the check got lost in the mail or what's up there.
God, that's so strange that he didn't pay that. He must have someone on his staff he can't trust or something.
It's probably it.
I think that's it.
Okay, so let's talk about David Graeber and Peter Thiel. Let's see. I guess I'll throw to you for Graeber, but I'll just say briefly on Thiel. So I recently read a book about Peter Thiel. It was by Max Shafkin. It was called The Contrarian. I wrote about it and Thiel for Jacobin. This article, Peter Thiel wants you to think he's an evil genius. He's just a rich guy. And says, venture capitalist Peter Thiel's massive wealth and resultant political influence are symptoms of a profoundly unequal society. But don't buy it into his evil genius self-branding. His ideology isn't a dark enigma. It's just run-of-the-mill rich guy stuff. So it's one of the things that really struck me reading that book is that Thiel, for reasons best known to himself, Thiel seems to be desperate to have people think that he's like a comic book supervillain. Like that is just how he systematically presents himself. This is a guy who literally talked to reporters about drinking the blood of the young to thwart the aging process. That he says he doesn't.
Forgot about that one. Oh.
Says he hasn't personally incorporated this into his health regimen, but he's considered it. And he has. In general, he seems to enjoy being a right-wing provocateur. He says a lot of things that, again, have a certain comic book supervillainish ring, at least in my ear. Like one of his favorite lines. In fact, I'll be interested to see if he pulls it out in the debate we're watching tonight, which, of course, is from 2014. I should say David Graeber is no longer with us. He passed a couple of years ago. But one of Thiel's favorite lines is this thing where it's like, we were promised flying cars and we got 140 characters, because that used to be the character limit on Twitter, which is also just a little bit funny. I think trying to remember who pointed this out. I think this might be our mutual friend Nathan. So it's like, well, if that's really what he cares about, like if he's all about the technology of the future, it's like, why isn't he building flying cars? What's up with that? I mean, his original money comes from PayPal, which is
he already made his Iron Man suit. It's called PayPal, and that one like decent API, you should be able to put JD Vance into a Senate seat. That's a fair recompense.
Yeah, exactly. There's this. So PayPal is just a sort of updated, that's just like financial middleman stuff, right? I mean that like slightly facilitates moving money around with like cut for the middleman. There's no that's it, right? And then his best, after he made his initial money that way, his best investment was Facebook, which seems a lot closer to the 140 characters end than the flying cars end. Although, granted, Facebook doesn't have a character limit. Like your uncle can take all the time he needs to say what he wants to say on Facebook.
Yes, yes. It's somehow it doesn't. Yeah, Twitter feels like it's making you stupid with its character limit, but it's true. Like Facebook, I mean, it's no better. Yeah, Thiel's a hilarious character. I forgot about the blood drinking. It's just like, the media is going to twist that so that he sounds like a weird guy,
Yeah, I know, right? It's like, no.
That's one of those little...
Don't be weird about it. I'm just talking about, like, injecting myself with the blood of the young so I'll never age. That's all.
That's, my God. That's so... Maybe we'll learn more about it tonight. Maybe he'll debate us into liking it. That's possible. And for what it's worth, like, I'm no big David Graeber expert, particularly. I will admit I haven't read either of his gigantic, most prominent books. I need to, of course. Plenty of articles, obviously, like everyone else. Great to, one of my favorite figures, just as a London School of Economics person who's good. That alone, and was closely associated with the Occupy movement, and and a ton of like bringing real visibility just to left wing frameworks of thinking and. It's a terrible loss, my God. But that said, I mean, obviously, what everyone else is obviously thinking in the audience and the chat is, why are none of us aware that this occurred? This is like this is just a slightly strange one. This is like, the Reagan Ayatollah debate. You're like, I don't know how I never heard of that one. That's just a strange one.
Well, I will say, one we did a while ago, like a few months ago, maybe, I don't remember exactly, with Cuba, Deep State Cuba from TIR, was a debate that feels about as strange to me, which is Caspar Weinberger versus E.P. Thompson at the Oxford Union in the 80s. So every once in a while there are these just bizarre matchups. I think in this case, I suspect that part of the reason I think I might have heard about it from that book, The Contrarian, but I think one of the reasons we've never heard of it is probably that 2014 is like just a little bit too early for the rise of sort of left media as we know it. Because I feel like if that had happened in like 2018, everybody would have been all over that.
Yeah, indeed. Those of us who've been, reading and writing for left media for more than a few years will be aware of the big watershed change that happened in the market, as it were, over just the last like several years, like 6 to 8 years. It's true, and that really did have an effect on how like raw visibility you could hope to have. So that, you're probably about right on that timing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that. Anyway, my best guess, but yeah, I mean, Graeber seems like a really interesting figure. He's one of those people who's like, if I ever had like a summer that I wasn't doing anything, I'd really like to just like block that off to like read everything that he wrote to, because there's a lot there that I haven't read, but that like the bits and pieces I've seen quoted and stuff seem tantalizing. And, I don't know that I'd even, agree with everything. I mean, I think he has a lot of different, he has a lot of different takes on a lot of different things where he's, coming at it from his own sort of eccentric combination of angles. But I mean, that's what seems like would make it more so interesting, like actually, put in the time to read all of that. And yeah, I mean, it just seems like an interesting writer in a way that too few are. Peter Thiel seems very uninteresting to me in a certain sense. I mean, he's sort of like fascinating in the sense that like, he's just at the center of a lot of very evil things that happen in the world.
More fascinating than interesting, if that's possible. Yeah.
Yeah,
It'll
exactly.
be boring, or maybe he'll end up defending like harvesting third world organ children for the complete protein, that you can get or something. I don't know. Like it's as someone who's just in the right wing donor universe. I mean, you have to assume he's going to be incredibly boring, but he definitely has made enough hilariously demonic statements that who could say? I don't know. This is like a real. I have no idea what to expect from this encounter. That's what I'm feeling right now. I feel like, just even on my appearances here, we've watched some strange debates like this one. I have no idea. Thank God I have a fine scotch with me, so I feel like that's a source of comfort.
Yeah, just poured some Talisker, so I'm right there with you. But yeah, I mean, I think. Like, again, I think it's extremely evil, although also in a way that it's maybe worth getting a good grip on the way in which he's evil. Because I think that, there is this impression. Something I was thinking about a lot when I wrote this review for Jacobin is I think that there's a lot of left-wing writing about the right where it's like the primary thesis is like you should be more afraid of the right, and that's not always wrong, right? I mean, that they do all sorts of things that you should be very concerned about, right? But I do think that it can slip into reinforcing these people's branding, that they're like all dark and edgy, and it's like I don't know. I mean, I think Peter Thiel, who I've absolutely nothing nice to say about. I mean, I think he is like a perfect embodiment of like everything that's most wrong with our society in a lot of ways. But like also I sort of feel like this idea that he's like got some, it's like, you have to understand like Rene Girard and, there's like all this like sort of deep, creepy, fascisty ideological stuff. It's like, I don't know, man. I don't think it's that deep. I think that he's like a rich guy who feels that like who wants the government to be even more subservient to rich guys than it already is, and that's like the core of it. I mean, like sometimes he it's like sometimes he likes to play up being a libertarian, and I'm sure that's true in some ways, but on the other hand he also spent much of the Bush years with his hand out for Palantir contracts and actually like getting mad at the Bush administration was like too squeamish about surveillance, so because he felt like he could make a lot of money off this if they really, loosened the restraints on this, which doesn't, sound very libertarian to me on the face of it. And
every libertarian gets over that instantaneously. Like Jeff Bezos, used to, call himself a libertarian, and he literally runs the war cloud. Like that's a pretty decisive reversal, I think. Like that's I'm not sure how libertarian that is. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that, and then like, okay, now he's the great sponsor of these like alleged populists like JD Vance and Blake Masters. And it just like every time you actually look at what these guys think, it's like this is just like 2012 Tea Party shit where you just like changed around the branding a little bit.
Yeah, indeed. Like it is still all like the same Mitch McConnell legislative program policies. I mean, it is like there isn't a meaningful distinction. And I mean, also too, like even someone like Thiel who kind of has that, particular sort of idiosyncratic idea about evil power where, the great aristocracy of talent and innovators and stuff. I mean, great, but like this is, again, because you co-created PayPal, so you are like a Roman senator, like that's based. But then also, you're putting in just like giant swine who did complete 180s of their own, like JD Vance. I mean, there's just so little. It ends up just being the exact same stuff. And then like the rhetoric, like they're the chained up Ayn Rand fountainhead repressed, Promethean innovators. These guys talk like the last like 40 years of neoliberalism didn't happen. Like your tax rate is lower than the person, your tax rate as a proportion of your income is lower than the person who's cleaning your toilets. Like it's It's just it just doesn't, despite the idiosyncratic kind of origins of it when you're out of power and online, it does end up like being like the same kind of predictable reactionary shit in the end.
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly right. All right, we should get to it. So again, this is David Graeber and Peter Thiel. I guess the sort of pithiest summaries of them are that Graeber is a kind of left anarchist, and Thiel is just kind of evil in a different sort of banal way than Hannah Arendt was talking about. That was Micah Utrecht's summary when I was talking about the book. He was like, what did he say? Because I was like bringing up some of the stuff about Palantir and all that. He's like, yeah, I think he's best described not specifically as a conservative or a libertarian. It's just kind of evil.
That's fantastic.
All right.
What happened to the second half of the 20th century? That is to say, if you're growing up in, say, 1900 and you're reading H.G. Wells and Jules Verne and that kind of thing, growing up at the turn of the century, and you're imagining what the world would be like 50 years later, well, you basically got it right, there were flying machines and submarines and rockets and talking boxes and TV, radio, so forth and so on. Some didn't get the time machine, but a lot of the basic gamut of inventions they expected to happen did in fact happen. Now, here's me growing up in the 60s, imagining, oh my God, I'm going to be 39 years old when it's the year 2000, sort of imagining what the world is going to be like. And we all kind of knew what was going to happen too. There was a similar list of stuff. And there were going to be anti-gravity sleds and teleportation devices and Mars bases and robot androids that could like do chores for you and immortality drugs. And, there's a basic standard list. And I don't think any of us expected we'd get all of that stuff within our own lives. But I don't think it occurred to any of us that we wouldn't get any of them. And the thing that fascinated me is that I know that everybody who grew up then, thought this stuff was going to happen. Well, if you were growing up at that time, it wasn't just fantasy. It was, authoritative voices. You go to the planetarium, you read National Geographic, you watch those TV science shows. Like all your elders who were supposed to know about this stuff were assuring you this is what was going to happen. That we actually believed that these things were going to happen has been wiped away as an embarrassment in our memory. It comes back to haunt us in other forms. So I wanted to break the taboo in a certain way. I remember around 2000, this is another point where this really struck home. I was waiting for all the people to talk about what we expected the world in 2000 was going to be like and how disappointed we were. Nobody said that. Everybody pretended we really were living in this world of unprecedented technological wonder. So, okay, the question became why? I don't think I have definitive answers, but as I began researching it, two things really jumped to the fore. And one of them was the degree to which there was a self-conscious change of direction in investment, in research and development. It was a kind of a ruling class freakout, which is taken up more by the right, but I think to some degree by the established left as well. That can be documented. People started saying, oh my God, what's going to happen when robots replace workers? It was a reaction to the unrest of the 60s. There were a lot of people, Alvin Toffler really embodied this in a lot of his publications, Future Shock. But it was brewing for some time before. People saying, all this unrest, imagine what it's going to be like, when the entire working class is replaced by robots, are all going to turn into hippies and dropouts. And it's going to be chaos. In that ferment, there's this idea that technological change is just happening too quickly. All this space age stuff is endangering the social order. That the degree to which change happens quicker and quicker and quicker. So that it seemed logical that since the sort of speed at which people could travel doubles every 7 years or so, I don't remember what exactly the number was, we should be in other galaxies quite soon. In fact, the speed at which people can travel stopped exactly the year he wrote that book. And around that time, there was indeed a shift in the direction of investment, technological investment, away from all that sort of space age stuff towards investment, essentially in information technology, in medical technology, and military technology. And that's where all the money's been ever since. The first thought you have is, oh, right, if they've been pouring money into that stuff, we still don't have a cure for cancer. We still don't have the immortality drugs. I mean, we've got Ritalin and Prozac and all this stuff that is useful for social control, but the really good stuff we never got even there. And even military technology, I mean, where's Klaatu? Where's the giant killer robot shooting death rays? We know they've been working on that, but even that stuff, they really haven't got. They got these model airplanes that can blow people up. Whoop-de-doo. Even there, with the things they have been pouring the resources into, we never got anywhere near what we thought we were going to have. Why is that? And the conclusion I finally came to is you can only understand this in terms of bureaucracy, but not just the bureaucratization of research, because it had always been largely bureaucratized. In fact, Manhattan Project, NASA were giant bureaucracies, which were incredibly productive of innovation. But it was a shift in the nature of bureaucracy that happened in the 70s and has accelerated ever since, which is essentially a corporatization, a certain type of corporatization of bureaucratization of research. It happens in universities, it happens in government, it happens in corporations themselves, which where the whole bureaucratic direction shifts away from an emphasis on production to more an orientation toward finance. So the old bureaucracies, I mean, whatever you want to say about them, they were big and stifling in their own ways. They actually could cultivate their eccentrics. I mean, if you look at the kind of people who were involved in the Manhattan Project, they're also almost all weirdos of one kind or another. Even the people who set up NASA, Jack Parsons, the guy who set up the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, who actually made the rocket engines, was actually a Thelemite follower of a Leicester Crowley, who used to have ceremonial magic orgies in his house. It was in the 50s. Eventually, it was a lot of it apparently was organized by his wife's sister, the orgies, who then ran off with L. Ron Hubbard, causing him to become so extreme. He was kicked out of NASA and became a special effects guy and eventually blew himself up. But these are the kind of people who set up NASA. You can imagine people like that being employed by government bureaucracies nowadays. I find it hard to picture. Any functional society, almost any society that's ever existed, has something to do with brilliant, imaginative, but extremely impractical people. We don't know what to do with them anymore. We just they're all living in their mother's basements saying weird things on the internet, and you can't tell which are crazy and which actually have something to contribute. You used to put them in academia, but now academia is all about self-marketing. Being in academia, I can see very easily what's happened in my own discipline, where any kind of new thinking is really discouraged. Social theory, basically what we're doing is we're writing these kind of endless annotations on French theory of the 1970s, late 60s, or maybe early 80s. I call it the classic rock phenomenon. They're still doing the intellectual equivalent of listening to Fleetwood Mac and Led Zeppelin and think they're cool. But this kind of endless recycling is typical of disciplines which really seem to be opposed in principle to radically new paradigms and new thinking. If you want to maximize the possibility, and I'll end with this, of unexpected breakthroughs, it's pretty obvious, what the best policy is. You get a bunch of creative people, you give them the resources they need for a certain amount of time, you maybe let them hang out with each other, but basically you leave them alone. And most of them are going to end up not coming up with anything at all, but a few of them will probably come up with something that'll even surprise themselves. If you want to minimize the possibility of unexpected breakthroughs, take those same people and then tell them they're not going to get any resources at all unless they spend the majority of their time competing with one another to prove to you they already know what they're going to create. Well, that's the system we have. And it's incredibly effective in stifling any possibility of innovation. So I'll leave off at that and see what Peter has to say.
Well, there's a disturbing amount I actually agree with David on here. I was careful to wear a suit tonight so that I wouldn't get confused with him, but I'm actually we have a tagline on our website at Founders Fund. They promised us flying cars, and all we got was 140 characters. And it's sort of, and I do think we've had this tale of two tracks in technology in the last 40 years, where there has been a very rapid progress in computers, internet, the world of bits, and there's been much more limited progress in the world of atoms, flying cars, transportation, new forms of energy, new medicines, all kinds of other things that would be very transformative for our society. So strong agreement that there's something about technology that has been relatively stagnant for the last 40 years. I also actually agree with David, and this is harder to prove, but that there's sort of a sense of contingency that this didn't have to be this way. You know, people say that so the most common explanation that's given is that this was a law of nature. Sort of the easiest things were discovered first, and then it became harder to discover new things. The low-hanging fruit was picked, and I think the truth is more like the fruit was never low-hanging. It was always of intermediate height, and there were various ways in which people reached for it and were able to get it, and somehow that's not happening as much anymore. And so I think things could have been quite different. And when I talk to various people in various tech and science areas, I always do get the sense that a lot more could be done. You know, we declared war on cancer in 1970. We thought we were going to win by the bicentennial by 1976. You know, and I think we could have made way more progress in the 44 years than we have made. You know, 1 out of 3 people at age 85 has dementia, and we're not even thinking of declaring a war on Alzheimer's, which again is sort of an indication of how much lower our expectations for the future have been dialed down. Why did this happen? You know, we could spend all evening debating that, and then we could get a pizza and go in the park and spend a few more months debating it. And I suspect we wouldn't actually figure out why this happened. And I want to suggest that a more important question to ask is really what should be done now. And you know, one of the in the brochure, David says, it was an excerpt from his article where he said, you know, we're not going to get cities with domes on Mars until we change the entire economic system. And this is sort of where I think we start to disagree a little bit. I would say in order to get cities with on Mars with domes and to go to Mars, we need to just start working on going to Mars. And so one of my colleagues from PayPal, Elon, in 2002, he thought we should go to Mars. He started talking to various rocket scientists, various engineers about it. He asked, what is it feasible? What would you actually do? He organized a company. He gradually built it, and it's still a ways off, but they're working on going there. They have T-shirts that say "Occupy Mars," and so I think they probably plagiarized that. But that's sort of what I want to sort of underscore is the sense of how one goes about doing these things. We can always sort of blame the bureaucracy, we can blame all these superstructures, but I think there is a surprising amount where we can just start doing something. What does it mean to be an anarchist? It's that you start acting as though you're already free, and that's actually a sentiment I strongly agree with, and I think it should not be just free to think and free to speak or free to break things, but also free to build things, and that we are free to start building the future today. When we started PayPal, I said we weren't going to hire any lawyers for the first year because I knew they were just going to tell us we weren't allowed to do this. We just broke all the rules. The system got built, and then sort of a year later, you ask for forgiveness. You don't ask for permission, and I think something like that, is sort of a template that is working in many of these cases. The reason I have this preference for small startups instead of large mass movements is I think you have to convince a much smaller number of people. Given that we're in this culture where there's a failure of the imagination, where we no longer, have sort of a common way to talk about a wildly different future. I think the way to get out of it is by convincing a small number of people that the future can look really different. I sort of think that if we say that you should only develop these technologies if they're developed collectively by everybody simultaneously, there is a weird way in which that becomes a reason not to do anything at all. And I think that's sort of the challenge that one has with these sort of with all these movements that have thought of changing our political system, whether it's Occupy Wall Street or the Tea Party. And I think a lot of the intuitions that things are broken, that we're near of stagnation and sclerosis are right. But there was sort of a sense that we're not going to get to Mars by having endless debates, and I think we will get to Mars by actually working on getting to Mars. And I think there is an urgency to solving these problems. It's not if you take something like climate change seriously, or any of these sorts of issues, we need to be working on energy solutions today, and that's why I'm not willing to wait for some mass movement. I'm going to try to just convince a small number of people so we can get going right now. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Wow, the baffler. Up to their name, man. Yeah, they got us on this one.
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I think like David Graeber's opening was very David Graeber-ish, which is like he's making a lot of interesting observations, and I'm not always sure where they're going. But Peter Thiel's was, I thought, kind of slick and disingenuous, because he's quoting Graeber saying that we're not going to get the dome cities on Mars if we don't have a different economic system. And then he's basically, well, one thing I notice is it's 2014, so these are still the focal points, right, for comparison. If it was a couple years later, it would have been like Trump and Bernie or something like that, right? But he sort of conflates Occupy Wall Street and the Tea Party. Is like, all these movements try to change things, as if he doesn't have a dog in that fight. In fact, 2 years before this debate, Thiel was a big funder of the Ron Paul campaign for president in 2012. So I think he's more positive about about the Tea Party than Occupy Wall Street. But like, also, okay, he's just kind of saying, well, I think we should get to Mars by working on getting to Mars. Let's do a Mars startup. And he's not really engaging with any of the reasons why somebody might think that we're not going to get the dome cities on Mars unless we have a different economic system.
Yeah, like it was, we're just getting started, but I mean, that was fairly superficial. Yeah, like, he says this, you just get some small group of people, just convince 2 billionaires, just act like you're free, and I feel free. Yeah, I bet you fucking do. I bet you're unconstrained. You feel free? Really? You, richest man in the universe? Holy tomatoes. That's incredible. Like that's fairly earnest, though. I mean, at least, like, that's like sort of drawing the issue, at least like saying, I'd rather just convince my powerful friends to make change happen. Why want to get a movement so that it has the legitimacy of it coming from the population? I'm trying to catch the bus here, And yeah, and not really like engaging with like the reality of what an undertaking like we're talking about here would be, like going to Mars, which is people do underestimate like what these things refer to. Like it's so much farther than the moon, and it brings up all these other issues and tons of insurmountable problems. And colonization is like a whole other, like the unrealism of just thinking this is something that a startup, yes, could do. I mean, you'd be looking at an enterprise that would take resources from the whole world to achieve. And for fucking what? Like, we have a perfectly good planet here if we would stop pooping on it all the time.
Well, that's the thing. So, I mean, one issue is, okay, would we actually want to go to Mars? I take it that there's a certain kind of ambition that, that going to Mars stands in for in this conversation. But like, at the end, Thiel did this thing where he's like, well, I guess we gotta get that Mars thing going because of climate change. It's like, no, that's fucking stupid. That's like this, whatever reasons you might or might not have to want to colonize space, that's definitely not one of them. Because this idea is like, I don't know, you terraform Mars to, like they do in Star Trek, to turn it into a planet that's fit for human habitation. It's like, well, hell, if we knew how to do that, it would be much easier to do that for Earth, right? Like that like any kind of climate change, apocalyptic, worst case scenario, it's still not going to be as bad as Mars. Like it's still going to be much closer to being fit for human habitation than Mars is. Like,
you go a hell of a distance to close that gap at all. Like that's a great point. Yeah, and all of us are already on this one, and all of our stuff is already here.
Yeah, all of our stuff is here. Like this. Like it's already got the oxygen that's right, like that's again, it would be so much easier. Like in any scenario where you actually figured out how to terraform Mars, fixing the effects of climate change would be like nothing compared to that. Like that would be so much less than making a planet that was not all fit for human habitation.
The energy system technology already exists. Like we have that technology. We just fucking won't invest in it on the required scale because we want to use that money for blowing up Ukraine and shit. Like that technology we've already got. Like we could do that now. It definitely would be easier. Shit, we've already got most of like the raw, like engineered concepts. It's incomparable. I mean, that's completely true. Yeah.
Well, and this is the thing. Like if you did, for whatever reason, you decided that you really wanted Mars colonies, and to be clear, I would not sign up. But if you did, then like there's no startup that's going to lead to a Mars colony, because what's the scenario in which that's going to get a return for the investors? Like, how's that going to work?
I mean, monumentally large expense over many, many, many years. Yeah, step 3 profit. I don't see it. I don't see it. At least with asteroids, you could redirect them and maybe we mine them. I mean, getting into space is just so expensive on its own, though. Like, it's just so impossible for anything to be economical outside of Earth's, in Earth's orbit. It's incredibly expensive.
No, and that's the thing. It'd be an incredible. Okay. We lost Rob. I assume he'll be back in a second. Just having some tech issues because not only do we not have flying cars yet, but we haven't even completely figured out StreamYard. But no worries. But yeah, it's like, look, this would be like, there is a reason why, like the moon, which, as you point out, is unfathomably closer than Mars. We don't even have permanent research bases or anything, never mind like colonies on the moon, right? Like even that we don't have. But even what little we have done with the moon, there's a reason that was NASA. There's a reason that like General Electric didn't land a man on the moon, right? It wasn't because there was like some law against that existed at the time that the original moon mission happened in the 60s, because it's not profitable. I mean, it's something that like it could only it would just be the fact that even Bezos like made his very brief trip so he could like say he was in space is already a crazy indulgence. That's like the amount of money that was spent on that for nothing in return. Like you're not gonna, that's gonna be a hard thing to explain to a board why you want to spend the money on that, right? I mean that like this would have to be, I assume that was Graeber's original point. I mean that if there's any scenario where this is going to happen, it's going to take like real collective economic planning.
Yeah, and just like the lack of familiarity with just the recent scientific history. I mean, all our recent stuff, the recent areas where we are getting sort of futuristic-y technology that you could argue is our little fun tricorder machines. And I mean, I would make a case that like right now, you have two scientific fields that are going through a renaissance. One is genetics and one is astronomy. And in all of these cases, it's public sector research in big lumbering government and big bureaucratic national science organizations and the university system and their sclerotic, wasteful, ivy-covered faculties. Like all these things that conservatives from all their weird, perverted stripes are always deriding. Like that is where the CRISPR-Cas9 research comes from in gene editing. You know, we've talked on the show before a number of times about the internet technology and mobile tech, like mostly coming out of the public sector. I mean, almost entirely from different portions of the research complex, you know? So again, like if these guys were, you know, Thiel serious, like maybe you want to like just engage at all with why now today's tech problems are better dealt with by tiny startups controlled by twisted, Silicon Valley vampiric millionaires rather than these big institutions, which lumbering government they might be. Like this is where all these came from. So have something to say about it or shut up is my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I don't know if this is what Graeber would say, because, you know, Graeber's an anarchist, probably has a little bit of different perspective, but like what I would certainly say is, look, did NASA employ a lot more weirdos with a lot less oversight in the 50s than it would now? Yeah, I'm sure that's true. But like, why is that? It's because you're talking about an era in which state funding for stuff like this was just like, you know, just dump trucks full of cash, you know, driven up to the door all day, every day. It's like, yeah, whatever. I mean, it's like, you know, it's like, oh, could you possibly be helpful? Yeah, go nuts, right? Whereas I think in an era of neoliberalism, you're probably going to get a lot more, well, yeah, I mean, a lot more like, hey, you know, this money doesn't grow on trees, guys. You know, let's you know, let's vet this very carefully. I mean, you can say some of it's cultural, but my impulse at least would be to, you know, to think that the real issue there is just like, do you have like lavish enough spending that you're gonna have all sorts of like strange peripheral people be given a job to try to figure out, you know, what they can contribute. And, you know, and I don't want to be too one-dimensional about this. I mean, I think, you know, there are things that markets are good at and there are things that they aren't good at, and, you know, you could have a realistic view of both. But I think that, you know, somebody in the chat earlier while Thiel was talking mentioned that book, The Entrepreneurial State, and it's, you know, I mean, something I know you've talked about before on here that is worth emphasizing is that, like, one thing that markets play a smaller role in and state planning plays a much bigger role in than most people think is technological innovation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that particular book, the Mazzucato book, is great. And just to mention, it's, you know, just sort of the most prominent right now piece of, you know, history of science literature on that subject. There's lots of other great ones, like, you know, for the internet, I like Jennifer Abbott's book, Inventing the Internet. But for green energy and, the modern genetic technology, yeah, you know, they all have their own kind of, you know, unique big government pedigrees. But it all comes out of just the basic reality that if you're in the marketplace, you know, if you're one of these, you know, if you're a firm pitching to one of these VCs that Peter Thiel was just telling us can fund a startup with much more nimbly than some giant movement about whatever, civil rights, whatever, you know, you're pitching toward an entity that has its own class interest, and more importantly, like, it's in the marketplace. It's got like a very finite amount of patience and timeline for when we're going to get some big, like, you know, telegenic goal, you know, as it were, whatever word I mean to say there. Like it's trying to like engineer toward a goal. Like when you're still at the level of fundamental science, it doesn't work like that. Like in the scientific process, it's about starting from what we know now. You know, there's no way to like invent the TV in the 1800s, but Maxwell was working on these electromagnetic equations, which ended up years later helping people realize, oh, we can transmit signals through perpendicular propagation just through the air, and it's incredible. Like the amount of stumbling on shit that happens in science and, you know, core engineering like that is really extensive. And if you have just from familiarity with like the history of this stuff, like, you know, Thiel is sort of affecting, like, you know, you're going to have recognition of this. You know, Mazzucato's book is, you know, the most impeccable way of going after this, you know, and I've talked about it too. But this is just the basic landscape that maybe I'm interested to see if like Graeber will engage with some of this. Like, it sounds like he has the better sort of idea of the actual history of science. Like, he's talking about the history of public research and space exploration. So maybe he'll engage with some of this. That would feel good.
Yeah, right. So you can have research in physics in the 19th century that gets you TVs in the 20th century, but if the funding for research comes from people who are primarily concerned with quarterly profit projections, then there's going to be very little patience with that, which makes perfect sense. So it just again, there are things when it comes to sort of translating technological breakthroughs into certainly consumer goods and whatever, like markets have their uses, but like the idea that markets are what give you technological innovation is really just very wrong. And certainly if you think about the list of things that like somebody in the 1920s would be like most impressed by if you brought them 100 years in the future.
Just on the face, just in the incentives, just the long-term, fundamental science research, which is expensive. Scientists are expensive. They're very educated. They're very scarce. They use all this custom lab equipment, very expensive. And maybe they never discover anything important. Like basic scientific research, you don't know if you're going to discover some shit. It's like the opposite of what you could expect like a company to do. The other competitors are going to be putting money into marketing and steal all your customers while you're waiting on some guy to invent radio or something. That's why it was invented by the damn Navy instead.
Yeah, exactly. And I do agree with Skelmf. The chat says, without the USSR to raise arms against the press behind the innovation is less now than one of the 50s. I mean, well, that's why you don't have the dump trucks full of cash being brought up to NASA all day, every day now, because there is much less of an incentive, right? I think the combination of World War II and the beginning of the Cold War, was a massive spur to a lot of this stuff. I mean, that the again, just kind of go through that list, right? There's the TVs, microwaves, et cetera, leading up to the internet and everything that comes out of the internet. Yeah. All right. Let's go back to the debate.
Oh boy.
Peter's suggestion that one could have or should want a cultural revolution without a social revolution to accompany it. Is that a fair description of his 10 minutes, his 15 minutes?
Well, in a way, what I thought was charming about the book is there's a call for a cultural revolution or reimagining. But I think that you're quite right in. Well, again, let's look at overlap first. You're quite right in saying that you don't need to change people's minds first. That a large, I would go further. I'd say that change people's minds by doing something. And what we found in our efforts at direct democracy, for example, was that you're not going to be able to convince people that a democratic society would be possible. You sit there and argue you could argue for days. You're not going to get anywhere. One reason for that is that people's everyday experience is sort of organized in such a way as to convince them that it isn't. I mean, almost nobody has any experience sitting down with any large number of people and coming to a collective decision in a egalitarian way, and so you have to do it. You just have to bring them into a situation where people do this sort of thing, and suddenly you watch 1,000 people make a decision together without a leadership structure, and it kind of works. And if you have the right process and organization going, and suddenly people say, "Wait a minute, well, I'd always assumed that was impossible. I never really thought about it, but what other impossible things might actually be possible too?" Your analysis in your book about startups being about the right size, about sort of division of labor within them, and actually a lot of overlap. We anarchists think about affinity groups. You need to have a relatively small group. It's around the same size. You need to have informal division of labor of emphasizes complementarity. I mean, we're more into rotation and other techniques to make sure that like permanent leadership structures don't arise. But in most essentials, it's quite similar. And partly too because we actually have to do stuff, and that's a system that has tended to work over time. I think that the real question has more, for me, has more to do with the larger structure. I mean, is it possible within a larger structure that seems to me to be to some degree designed to make sure that either it doesn't or that the sort of thing happens to a very limited degree? And this is why the reasons why actually I think it's not something we can ignore entirely. I think the shift that happened in the 70s towards sort of within the way capitalism itself worked was away from profits largely coming from production or even commerce at all, but through finance. And finance in practice largely means other people's debts. It means various ways of rent extraction. And I like your analysis in the book. I think this is quite right, that capitalism and the market are not the same thing. That when you have pure market situations, that does tend to stifle innovation. It's not the purely desirable thing that economists say. You can't really have systematic profits under pure competition. I think that I agree with that. And that in a situation where you don't have rapid technological advance, that the alternative monopolies will tend to be forms of rent extraction. And what you're trying to do is to talk about forms of monopolies that wouldn't be forms of rent extraction because they're actually based on making the pie larger. So far, so good. The question that I have is really one of cause and effect. At the moment, what we have is a large number of monopolies that are in the business of rent extraction more than anything else. And there's certainly the most powerful corporations or financial institutions. That's basically what they do. Well, the question is, is this overall culture of stagnation? I mean, which it really is, a culture which in many ways is a direct assault on the human imagination, a product of those structures of power that those guys have created itself. I mean, I think,
Well, there's so many different threads here. Hard to know
okay.
where to start.
I've been talking for a while.
I would say that there is I agree that the eccentric university professor is a species that is going extinct fast. And we have sort of you have a Gresham's law inside these universities at work where the bad currency is driving out the good, and in effect where the people who are nimble in the art of writing for grants are displacing the idiosyncratic thinkers who are generally, one suspects, much less nimble at that sort of activity. So yes, there's a screwed up bureaucracy, and then the question is always, where should we be applying our energies? And I've been a big, like yourself, I've been a big critic of the university system. But I used to believe that the right way to do it was, all sorts of lobbying for internal change, or all these different things you should do. And I concluded that it would be much more effective just to encourage talented people to leave. And that was actually the easier thing to do. I spent a lot of time looking at it. It was I thought of starting a whole new university and doing everything right. Included, I couldn't even do that. I looked at people the last 100 years. People have generally had a bad history of trying to do this, and so I thought it was actually better just to get people to leave. And I think this is the issue. And I'd say yes, there are problems with all kinds of structures in our society. They probably are causing some problems, but it's not where I want to put the focus of what to change. And yes, some of these structures exist. They slow us down in different ways, but we should just start acting as though we were already free. And I think there are some things you absolutely can't do. You probably can't get a tenured position at Yale. I couldn't get a tenured position at Yale. But there are lots of other things we can do. And instead of sort of beating our head against brick walls, we should try to go down the various paths that are actually still available.
Again, speaking from the perspective.
Yeah, I mean, there are various things that you can do if you're a billionaire. Like I saw it's a libertarian guy I follow on Twitter, who was quoting, this is also something I've seen attributed to Milton Friedman, but I think he was quoting von Mises talking about how markets are like democracy, but every penny is a vote, and it's like, yeah, no, fair enough. Assuming that we all have the same number of pennies, or some way of collectively allocating them.
Yes. It's like Bruce McCullough said in the original Kids in the Hall series, I vote with my dollars. They're called dollar votes. That's why. That's why there's a huge market for plastic surgeons for vain, aging rich people. And in poor parts of even the United States, you can't get a GP or a pediatrician for a low-income family to have their kid get checked out and stuff because of just the most conventional market economics possible. Wealthy people have all them dollars to vote with for their nose lifts and their eyeball veneers. I don't know what people have done. That runs into money, and that's where the market is. And physicians, who are as much a bunch of bloodless money-seeking professionals as we're all encouraged to be across the board, they respond to that.
Yeah, right. I mean, one of the things I think Peter Thiel actually said earlier is that look at all these people with everybody's we have an aging population and we haven't even thought of declaring war against Alzheimer's. Like, so yeah, not a lot of Alzheimer's research, a lot of plastic surgery. What does that tell you? Like, and which is like at the end, he's like, I mean, Thiel's doing this weird thing where he's like, well, and to be fair, Graeber's kind of letting him, and maybe some of that's a function of the topic of the debate, and maybe some of it's just that that like Graeber is just kind of off in his own world somewhere, thinking about like three interesting things that Peter Thiel's book, which is, by the way, a lot of the writing for that was done by current U.S. Senate candidate Blake Masters.
Of course, yes.
But Thiel, Graeber's just kind of off in his own world, thinking about the like three interesting things that were in Thiel's book, and like how those might relate to something he's been thinking about anthropology and this and that and the other thing, and so he's not really like coming back down to earth to like nail Peter Thiel on this, but like Thiel's doing this like kind of slippery thing where he's like, yeah, I mean, I guess maybe you could say there's some big structural problems with how our economy works, but I would prefer not to focus on that.
Yeah, the institutions that hold us back, they always do. There's no need to pay attention to the large constraining institutions in which I am well invested. Pay no attention to the personal wealth management office behind the curtain. It's again, like this also follows a classic thing I like, which is conservatives complaining about things that they did. It's these institutions, they don't listen to people, and we don't invest in things anymore. Like, those are all like big conservative policy goals that people like you have succeeded in making the center of political gravity. Yes, that's another terrible thing you did. I agree.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I'll bet if I had $1 billion, I wouldn't want to talk about the problems with the structure of our economy either.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's institutions, they hold us back. Who knows what institutions they might be, or who might be a major equity partner in them. I mean, financial institutions like the one I co-founded.
It's like The Simpsons when Homer leaves Bart out in the rain for like 7 hours and comes picks him up. He's like, look, we could sit around talking about who forgot to pick up who until the cows come home. Like, we could sit around talking about how resources and economic power are distributed and whether I should have 100 zillion times more of both of those things than you do. But that doesn't seem like a very productive line of inquiry to me.
It is true. This is also one of those kind of frustrating category of debates where the lamer person isn't being yeah, as you said, kind of put paid enough. I mean, and I love the screen grab of David Graeber's sweet face thinking about the difficult analytical problems of the world when he should be insulting Peter Thiel in front of a bunch of impressionable young people. You know, like he should be blowing him up more. Like Thiel, I mean, how many of these entities are you invested in, Peter? I mean, I feel like there is possibly some potential here. And, I mean, we're only partway through it. Maybe he's fooling all of us. Maybe he's lulling us into a false sense of security. But I'm afraid it's going to become a real sense of security when he's just nice and isn't mean enough to him. That's my concern.
Yeah. I mean, I think something I think about a lot. I think I actually read this just before I debated Charlie Kirk. I was in a hotel bar in Phoenix, and I was reading on my Kindle this book of interviews with Christopher Hitchens, and there's the last interview he ever gave, on his deathbed, which was just like, it wasn't really about like death or anything. It was just a normal interview, but he's talking to Richard Dawkins, and of course they're mostly talking about religion. But there's something that Hitchens kind of says in passing where he's reflecting on this debate that he did that, he wasn't crazy about or whatever. He says, well, in debate, you have to have just one goal. And, he was saying in this debate that he did, which was the is religion good for a world thing he did with Tony Blair. He was, he was saying it sounded like probably his performance suffered a little bit because he was trying to do too many things at the same time. And maybe one goal is overstating it, but yeah, I think it is worth getting clear in your own head before you show up to one of these things what exactly you're trying to accomplish. And I think one very useful thing for David Graeber to do in this, if he had been thinking in those terms, would be like to really, really hammer that point about the connection between those basic economic structures and this problem that they're talking about, innovation, and then the connection between those basic economic structures and Peter Thiel. It's like, yeah, I'll bet you don't want to talk about that. Why not?
Yeah.
All right, let's keep going.
Of anti-authoritarian movements is always a big debate. To what degree can you work inside existing institutions? To what degree do you just say the hell of it and create things on the side? Or to what degree do you try to create things on the side, within the nooks and crannies of the existing institutions where they're not looking, because most of us aren't in possession of $1 billion or $2. So you kind of have to do that. The central question is, what are most people going to do? Because, and the reason. And I think most people don't understand this about Occupy Wall Street. I mean, it wasn't like the Tea Party, an attempt to work through the political structure. It was exactly the opposite. We made a very determined decision quite early on that we were not going to run candidates. We were not going to enter the political process because it was hopelessly corrupt. I mean, essentially, it's a system of organized bribery and a little more. There's a small percentage of the population that's essentially profiting off this system of extraction, of rent extraction, and they've set up this perfect circular system where they essentially legislate the laws, bribe politicians to put them into place to allow them to extract more rents, and pass off the cut to the politicians. I mean, to some degree, it's all institutionalized. When a large corporation is caught doing fraud, they don't even have to plead guilty. They just sort of sign this agreement saying, okay, sorry, you got us. We're not going to admit fault, but we'll give you money. And the money's always less than they made on the fraud. So basically the government's saying, it's okay as long as we get our cut.
Look. I don't think there's that. I don't think there's quite that much intentionality. I mean, I have sort of both a less malign and more dysfunctional view of the system. I think there's no conspiracy. I think there's I don't think there was a conspiracy to stop scientists from actually working. I think it just sort of
no. But there's people make actual decisions. I mean, it's a conspiracy implies there's a secret cabal. It's pretty public. They sit around and say, how much are we going to allocate for this? How much are we going to allocate for that?
But I think that look, the place where I think we end up disagreeing on some level is I always get the sense that what your solution always is a larger thing that somehow ultimately at the end of the day will require more structure more bureaucracy of one sort or another. And so we're living in an advanced technological society, and so direct democracy does not actually work as a way to think about things in our society. It's too complicated. You can't vote on everything. We have a plebiscite system you have in California is widely seen as not having worked terribly well.
Yeah, no, we're not for that. Yeah.
And there are probably parts that work.
This is a little sooner than I was meaning to stop again, but I did just want to point out that Thiel is doing a couple of classics here. One is any sort of analysis of the way that power works that suggests that it's bad is a conspiracy theory, which I mean, I do think, to his credit, Graeber, correctly calls him on. I mean, I do think that Graeber's sort of method of, of explaining existing power structures is a little bit too sort of focused on the idea of like corruption, that like, that you're like everybody's taking the money or whatever, as opposed to just like, this is structurally how it works. But even so, it's like clearly not a conspiracy theory. I mean, he's just saying like, here is my description of what goes on in the open. And then the other one where I do think that as gross as this is to say, Thiel has half a point, although only half of one, is about direct democracy. Because look, I mean, I'm sure you, I think the kind of job you have, right? You probably have to go to faculty meetings.
You do have to.
That's not fun, right? Like nobody enjoys that. I mean, anybody who does enjoy it should probably be removed from society for probably, the sake of public safety. And so, yeah, I mean, if you describe a form of economic democracy where, there's like, there are like mass meetings every 5 minutes to determine everything that ever happens, then, I agree. That's not an appealing vision, or probably a practicable one. I like, there's a lecture by Slavoj Žižek, you can find it on YouTube, called A Plea for Bureaucratic Socialism, where he makes the point that he's like, look, I want my relationship to the power company, to water, to like, he lists off all these things. I want my relationship to these things to be never having to think about them. Which is kind of fair, right? I mean, this is like part of the appeal of Medicare for all, that you don't have to you don't have to think about the you don't have to like spend all this time on the phone with somebody who's like making decisions about this stuff, right? You can just like cut all that out, and you come in and you talk to your doctor, but that's it. So yeah, but I also think it's a false dichotomy, right? So like ideally what I would like Graeber to say here, and he might not, because he's probably too much of an anarchist for me, but like ideally what I'd like Graeber to say here is, yeah, those are our only options, man. I mean, that like you can have representative democracy. You can do like actually existing co-ops like Mondragon in Spain do, where there's like, like the mass meeting thing. You might do that like once a year or something, but on a day-to-day basis, sure. I mean, you can empower people to make these decisions, but they could still, you could still do that consistently with having them be more democratically accountable to the people they're directing than the not at all that they are under capitalism.
Yeah, like we could have dramatically more democratic engagement and influence over the economy and be nowhere near a Paracon meeting regimen. Like just having economic planning, but just where the broad plans are subject to like a public referendum of some type. For example, like there's a number of ways we could chop this up. And so, of course, much like you call any reference, to the working of the levers of power, oh, that's a conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
Putin and his inner circle control Russia. Oh, these conspiracies. You're crazy. Like it's a legitimate thing to do. You only use that when, you feel uncomfortable with where the analysis is probing, But then, that's excellent too. I mean, then you, just caricature it as, oh, you want to have constant democratic approval over everything. Like, no, we could have much more than, the almost nothing we're starting with. And be pretty
totally.
So, Graeber's heating up here. He was hotter in this segment. I think he's hitting his stride, I think.
Good. Yeah. But that's exactly right. I mean, you can have no democracy, as David Friedman puts it, although Friedman thinks this is a good thing. You can have competitive dictatorships. That's how workplaces can work. Or you can have, sure, you can paint a picture where you have too much and we're all spending too much of our lives on it. But, there's a lot of territory in between those poles, that you can, again, you could have, you could have a Mondragon kind of style setup where you have, you elect at least a committee that might hire people, who are doing particular job, particular managerial tasks that involve technical skills, but at least they're, hired by a committee that you elect. Depending on the kind of management position, maybe you can elect that. You can have workers voting on an operating agreement that's like a union contract, except that you don't negotiate with a separate boss. Like there are all kinds of ways in which decision makers can have far more democratic accountability to the people they have power over than they have under capitalism, where the only power that you have is the power of exit, and don't use that too many times, or else it's going to be hard to make a living in the future. It's like, oh, I see a lot of gaps in this resume. What's going on there? Like you can have much more than the almost none that you get where your only power is the power of, exit, consistently, with not going all the way to the stuff that Thiel has said, oh, this would be impractical. It's like, yeah, okay, maybe, right? Like maybe it'd be impractical to do 10, but do we have to have 1.5?
Exactly. It's conspiracy theory claim and then caricaturing the opposing view. Look, Baffler somehow got Thiel in a room with a real left intellectual. I'm amazed, but of course, he's going to, you use these threadbare conservative feints that we've seen many times before. This is an interesting debate. This is fun. I have a good feeling about it.
Nice.
The best are actually the parts that are the least democratic. They're sort of there's sort of specific government agencies where people are well trained on like securities law or some esoteric area, and it's not very accountable. It's not very democratic. But that's sort of what you have to do in a complex technological society, and I think that's what's always being underestimated, either by Occupy Wall Street or the Tea Party. Okay. Our society is too complex for everyone to get to vote on everything.
Right. Well, I mean, we're not actually for everybody plebiscite systems. Plebiscite systems tend to be actually very undemocratic in effect, and there's a reason why dictators, for example, actually love plebiscites. We're talking about very much more complicated fundamental structural reforms and how things happen, which involve decentralization. This is something that people don't mostly understand. One of the things about anarchist models that makes them so effective is that you decentralize everything you possibly can and put it down to individual initiatives.
So let me concede that there are things about that I would like politically, but I want to go back to the technology question.
Right.
Could you do the Manhattan Project? Could you do Apollo? Could you get someone to the moon in a radically decentralized, chaotic system? Or do you need coordination and planning?
Decentralized. Yes, you do need coordination and planning. Frankly, I don't think that creating very large scale but fundamentally democratic structures historically is that hard. I think it's really hard to create tiny structures that are democratic. You can get very large structures that work that way and coordinate things. What you don't get so much are egalitarian families, small scale structures. That's what's actually much, much trickier. I think that there's a lot of things that would have to be organized very, very differently. And I understand also that you want to do some things now. And I want to emphasize here very strongly that I totally agree on that. I mean, if you can come up with an immortality drug, great, go ahead, do it.
Dictator of a small company if I'm doing that.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I'm totally rooting for you here. If you can go to Mars,
I'm not aware of any sort of tech startup research project that was organized in this radically democratic way that really worked. I think the things that work are shockingly hierarchical in these things. They because they require leadership, they require coordination. We should be free to join other ones, and so it's good if they're small and they don't encompass our whole society. But I really don't think a startup is not. It's never. It's really far from a democracy. People don't get to vote on things. And there've been a lot of experiments with this in Silicon Valley, where people have tried to start companies where they've been completely transparent. Normally, it breaks down when they're transparent on how much everybody gets paid. It's like at about 50 people start killing each other over those sorts of things. And certainly, if you try to actually make it participatory on everything, you end up with internal debate, and you don't actually get anything done. That's and I think a lot of people would actually like to build companies like that.
Part of the problem is we grow up being told we're in a democratic society, but none of us have any experience. There's plenty of places in the world where people are sort of trained from the ground up on how to do this, and it becomes much easier. So I don't think it's absolutely impossible to create these things. But I also think, and this is a problem I think both of us have, is that it remains true that the government is the major source of most basic research. I think at the moment, I just looked it up actually before coming here, it's 56% of basic research is government funding, but only 16% is corporate. The rest of it is universities and nonprofits. So if you put the universities and nonprofits together, not profit-oriented institutions other than government are still doing almost twice as much basic research even than corporations are at this point. So it's the startup is a nice model for certain things. There's some amazing things that have been done, but I don't think we have to assume that's the only possible model for where the breakthroughs are going to come from, because historically it hasn't been.
I'm not saying it's the only way to do things. I'm very much in favor of it, in part because I agree there's a lot that's broken in our society, and so I think and so that's why I think the models we have to work harder on are ones that work on a very small scale, and where you don't need to convince as many people, and where you don't need to start with as big a structural change. But yes, I mean there are all sorts of things that I could imagine different ways they could work. I cannot imagine a straightforward way of changing these systems from within, and very hard to see how they change from without. And that's why it's like, how do we get to Mars? Do we change the NASA administration funding thing? Really hard to do, but maybe you can start a company and gradually do something like that.
Yeah, in the case of Mars, there's also a question of determination. I mean, NASA did pretty well to get to the moon. I mean, they did it surprisingly quickly considering what they had at the time. So there's nothing inherently faulty in the model. It's just there doesn't seem to be the political will. And we have to ask why that is. And we probably have somewhat different but overlapping explanations of that. All right, I agree. It would be great to have somebody working on these kind of breakthroughs, and I totally applaud the fact that people are doing it. It's also the case that I want to see a society where everybody can. And I often say that the one thing that's not a scarce resource in the world is imaginative people with possible solutions to intractable problems. There's probably nobody in the entire world that doesn't have some idea that we would never have thought of, and we're both pretty smart guys. And the problem is that the overwhelming majority of those people go around every day being told to shut up. How do you unleash that? I mean, that's my basic question, and that's why I'm interested in these broader political questions, because if one could unleash that creativity really, then I think a lot of the things we think of as problems will fall, these supposed dead ends of technological social thinking that we've hit, would seem ridiculous. I mean, there's people out there could probably come up with cold fusion. There's people out there that could probably come up with almost anything you can imagine. Right now, they're sitting around trying to pay off their father's debt on the rice plantation and spending all their time in a shoe factory. Which is on low tech because it's more profitable to run it that way. And that's what I'm concerned about. How do we get those guys in on the game?
Well, I look. I think there are all these structural things, but I think people, I do think there's always a sort of failure of the imagination. I was on a super tracked career. I was, went to law school. Worked at a law firm in Manhattan for 7 months and 3 days, and then when I left, people down the hall, and it was really weird psychosocial dynamic where on the outside everybody wanted to go in and on the inside everybody wanted to leave, and people down the hall told me that it was good to see that someone could escape from Alcatraz, and it was actually all you had to do was go out the front door, and I know you'll say, well, it's harder for all sorts of different reasons, but actually no, all you had to do was go out the front door. And so I do want to always push back a little bit on how powerless people really are, and I'm annoyed by that people are not more creative, that they're not doing more in all sorts of contexts. But I think there are actually a lot of ways to do things, and that's surely that's where we have to start. Since you're not going to start by we're not going to start by changing the bureaucracy at NASA or at Yale University or anything like that.
Well, it's been very polite. Thank you.
I actually respect.
So I do want to just, DJ, run back the tape there. What was that exchange just now? Yes. It's a very polite debate. I suspect it would have been less polite if it had happened a couple of years later. Although probably also the flip side is it wouldn't have happened a couple of years later when Thiel emerged as the major Trump backer in Silicon Valley in 2016. But even peel away the politeness. What was that exchange just now? Well, Graeber, hey, there are all kinds of people here who might have the capacity to be tech geniuses and come up with innovations that we need, who are instead spending all their days working in shoe factories or trying to pay off, their father's debt in the rice farm, because we have a fucked up economic system. We have all this squandered economic, all this squandered, intellectual potential. Because so many people who might be able to make real contributions have to spend all their time hustling for their daily bread, or paying off debt, etc. Now, whatever you think about that argument, I think you would have to think about it for a long time to come up with a worse answer than. I don't know, man. I mean, when I graduated from Stanford, I worked for a nice law firm, and then I quit because I decided that I'd rather do tech stuff. So, see, people can just do stuff.
Yeah, great patriarchal moment there when I don't want to say anything. Well, my life story, people love to hear that. Let me tell you my off-ramp to becoming a big rich guy. You are right that this debate probably would not have happened a couple years later, although I would say it wouldn't have happened because by that time, Thiel had been revealed as the source of the funding of Hulk Hogan's lawsuit that destroyed Gawker.
That's true, too.
I don't know. Baffler would have loved to have him on after he fucking left a crater where Gawker was. Friggin' libertarian. Oh, you outed me. I'll find some other guy who has a grievance with you and friggin' armor up his attorneys with evil money and suing the newspaper so it itself, or the news outlet, so it goes bankrupt itself for this indignity.
You could do
There's
stuff.
two reasons.
It's easy to do stuff. You can.
He feels free.
Yeah, just act like you're already free, and dump an incredible amount of money. into lawsuits so that your media organizations that have been a thorn in your side could just cease to exist.
Yeah, money from rent collection, money from output on transactions, like and Facebook, for God's sake, like that's an ad oligopolist. I mean, that is, again, this is that mode where conservatives they complain about things. Sometimes it's just reactionary against social change. Sometimes they're mad about something capitalism is doing. That's like 50% of the things they say. And then the other quarter is complaining about shit that they did 6 years ago and forgot.
It's like, oh no, it's terrible. People just live off rent collection. Man, when am I getting my next PayPal check?
Yeah, when's that dividend coming? What the hell is? Come on. That children's blood must erase your short-term memory or something. That's how good it is. It's so good you forget all the world's problems come from your horrible record of crimes.
Yeah, no, exactly. But yeah, you're right. So for various reasons, it probably wouldn't have happened 2 years later. But I mean, like, literally, like, this guy is, I mean, he comes from, was it his dad was worked as an engineer in Namibia when he was a kid. He went to Stanford. He had where he founded the Stanford Review, which was a knockoff of Dinesh D'Souza's Dartmouth Review, both of which are student newspapers that launched the careers of numerous right-wing ghouls. And then he went off to be a law firm. It's like, yeah, why don't those guys you're talking about who are like working in the shoe factory in Thailand, why don't they just like go off and work at a white shoe law firm for 7 months and then just decide to quit and go do tech stuff? What's stopping them? People can just do stuff. Act like you're already free.
Yeah, exactly. Have your mother, who's on the board of the National United Way organization, to get the chair of IBM, who also sits on that committee, to use your son's shitty basic computer language so that you can have the Windows monopoly. That's the thing. Why don't you do that instead of sitting around all the time?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, yeah, I'll bet that would get that rice farm debt paid off.
These millennials don't want to work. It's a problem.
Exactly. All right, let's go back about 10 seconds because I think we probably do want the setup for this.
You're not going to start by we're not going to start by changing the bureaucracy at NASA or at Yale University or anything like that.
Both been very polite. Thank you.
I mean, I actually respect the
yes,
I do want to see immortality drugs. As someone wants to invest in that, great. I want to live forever.
Is there a way in which, or any ways in which your respective positions are?
Man, that hits different now. David Graeber saying
poignant moment.
Wants to live forever. Moment. Jesus. All right.
Sweet David.
Are working against each other.
Oh yeah.
Do you have political objectives that are separate from the utopian political or the utopian technological universe that you'd like to see?
I don't believe that these political institutions can be changed. I don't think this is what one should do. I used to believe this a great deal. If you held a gun to my head and said, what are your political views on things? I'd say that I'm sort of libertarian and this is socially more liberal, fiscally more conservative, or something like that. But temperamentally, I would describe myself much more as a political atheist. I do not believe that the existing political order is divinely ordained or sacred or special, and I don't believe there's any other order that could replace it that would deserve that sort of deference. And I find myself just not believing in it.
Mm. Right. I mean, which is why it's funny that we're seeing this as a debate, because I've been part of a movement whose basic premise was we are not going to work through the political system. I mean, one thing I find in some of this stuff I've been doing economically about money and different ways of thinking about money, moving past the sort of dead end neoliberal discourse about currency, is that the political class is just useless. There's no point in talking to those guys. They're basically bought and sold. They're totally locked into a certain logic, whereas even the technocrats, the guys who are kind of running the system, they know the thing is broken, and they've got to actually put in place these policies these idiots come up with. I mean, they know they're based on entirely false premises. There's a huge break right now between the Bank of England and the entire political class in England, where the Bank of England has said, well, actually, it's not like there's really a lack of money. Money is created by making loans. Everything they say is wrong. We admit that now. The heterodox economists were right. Political class keeps carrying on as if this isn't the case. So yeah, the political system itself is useless. The question
I'll disagree with
what?
The money part here.
Yeah.
So I feel like you could disagree with something a little
sure,
bit.
there we go.
So, we can have all sorts of debates about distribution or about things like this, but I actually do think that that there is such a thing as an economy, that there is such a thing as scarcity, that there's not enough necessarily to go around, and that therefore you have this very complicated way of allocating things. And even though it is true that we can, in theory, print infinite amounts of money, that's not a way of solving the problem of scarcity. And I think actually by shifting the problem to the level of money, you're making the same kind of shift from atoms to bits that you questioned earlier on, where I think of money as the perfect virtual good, but what it stands for are always real goods, and so when you print more money, you don't actually change the underlying nature of the real goods, and I think that's something that I'd be much more focused on. The reason I think the technological stagnation is a problem is because of this problem of scarcity. And I think we need to, you have 7 billion people in the world, 6 billion people live in emerging market nations, and if they're going to have living standards anything like the ones that people in the developed world enjoy, you need all sorts of new technologies to enable that to happen. And the reality is that we have a certain amount of scarcity. Economics was the science of how to economize, in some ways. And I think in some ways we shouldn't turn it into the science of how not to economize.
Oh, I'm not saying that people should just print money. I'm actually saying we should acknowledge how money actually works, which is just not the way the politicians say. This is a long conversation, but I think that what we can say is that there are certain types of economic policy which would unleash popular creativity, which is the other factor, because money isn't just measuring the value of stuff. It's also measuring the value of human actions, and it's also a promise of future creativity. And that's the thing. What are the forms of money creation or economics in general that will do that? Again, going back to the question of all those people with the ideas who basically are told to shut up all the time. Some people often criticize me, for example, for sometimes putting in a good word for basic income, which is actually something that there are certain elements of the left and the right can support. I think of it as partly as an anti-bureaucratic thing, that actually reduce the size of government and not have all these bureaucrats looking over everybody's shoulder, telling them, like, making them feel bad about themselves all the time. If you simply gave people a basic income support, it would mean that you're trusting them to decide how they want to contribute to society. Ironically, a lot of the social welfare policies, which you think of as stifling, were also, actually unleashed creativity in ways that we only know now that they're gone. I live in England. It used to be, since the 60s at least, every 5 years, there'd be some amazing new band or musical trend that would just sweep the world coming out of England. And that's all kind of stopped since Tony Blair, really. And I asked people there, well, what happened, And everybody says the same thing. They got rid of the dole. All those guys were on unemployment. And they were squatting too, so they got rid of squatting. It used to be there'd be free housing, and you'd have a base. It wouldn't be much, but you'd have enough money that you could get your friends together with a guitar, and maybe 1 out of 1,000 of them was John Lennon, but that's enough, And now John Lennon is lifting boxes in some department store as welfare conditionality. We're never going to hear the new trend. So I just think that techniques would just leave it up to people on the broad scale to innovate in their own ways would actually be much more effective in creating the conditions where all these things both of us want to see would happen. And that's why I'm interested in those broader questions, because at the moment, I think the system we have is very much about tying people down. I mean, again, the debt situation, this is not something that just happened. This happened because of very calculated decisions. And you could see it very much, again, in the UK, where they did tuition reform, where they said, okay, let's just raise tuition across the country and give everybody student loans, and then we'll be in debt. I mean, it's completely self-conscious. You know, this is not just something that just happens somehow. But the point of that is to make sure that people start thinking of education not as a sort of exploring whatever they think might be interested in, deciding for themselves where they can put their creativity, but rather, you know, do something which people who want to hire them in the relative immediate future will definitely want now.
So again, look, I think the student debt is a huge problem. You know, certainly I would ascribe a lot of the problem to the runaway cost structures universities have. So so that's as much a problem as it is
in America.
The interest compounding. And I do think I think the intentionality, there's not that much intentionality in the system. It's just there's not enough.
When there was, it was a policy. They just said, okay, let's create student debt.
Well, I think there was a sense that there was some degree of scarcity on these things. You always have, you know, there is this problem of scarcity that, you know, and this is why I think it's, we shouldn't obscure that. Now you can say there are distributional questions, and maybe, you know, other people should have paid for it or something. But
that's why those larger questions, I don't think they can be ignored. And I think the final thing I would say is that you can't really be a political agnostic in some sense. It's understandable that one wants to work within the system that exists, but, you know, insofar as one does not end up self-consciously opposing that system in some way, or, you know, calculating a way to at least act in a way that will not reinforce it, one tends to act in ways that do reinforce it and actually often make the problem worse. I mean, you know, what we have, it seems to me, since the 70s, and this has corresponded to this technological stagnation, has been an increasing emphasis on, you know, the fusion of government power and financial power in the system of rent extraction. And again, maybe nobody sat down and planned it, although, you know, they certainly talk things out with each other at the G8s and so forth. And there is a degree of self-conscious, at least guidance of the direction of the whole thing. But I mean, lobbyists are essentially conspiring. That's what they do for a living. They just do it, you know, publicly and officially. That has sort of locked in a structure which is inherently inimical to innovation. And one can operate within that, and, you know, and it's great that there are pockets of people within the system who are going to try to turn it against itself. But you're essentially pushing against a tide here.
well, it's again,
All right, so I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, but this last chunk is my favorite chunk of Graeber, this whole debate.
Oh yeah, no question. Like, he really did. My hope was fulfilled. Yes, he was hitting his stride, man, because yeah, this is pretty impeccable. Like, you know, the social democratic welfare state is what really supports experimentation and stuff. Like, that's a thing libertarians always say about the market. With markets, you can experiment because Joseph Stalin isn't controlling you. But in reality, it's the opposite of the truth. You have to hustle to make money. Like you said, the John Lennon of today is lifting boxes in some warehouse somewhere. Like, very, very strong stuff. You know, and Peter Thiel forced back on. You could tell, like, what he's really made of, because now he's, you know, kind of in the corner a little bit more. Graeber's making all these great points about experimentation coming from the public sector and requiring that long-term steady public support. And the arts too. And so he has to say, well, I do believe in scarcity and markets and efficiency. Like, that's Econ 101. Get kids to believe in market shit. I should know because I have to teach it all the time. And let me tell you, like, that is like literally something I told a bunch of kids about, like, literally this week. We went back to school this week. God bless us, on campus again.
Yeah.
You know, so like, that is like, it goes to show econ's role in society. Like, when a billionaire is in trouble, Like the first pages of an economics textbook is what he just described. And scarcity is real,
Sure,
but
of
the
course.
thing about capitalism and industrialization and exponential growth is you attenuate it over time. So yeah, we still, even a billionaire like Thiel has scarcity because he's only got
Sure.
so many hours in his day. And he only has so many billions. He only has so much money for destroying news outlets that displease him. So it's true, but it's so attenuated in the industrial era and for the rich that, like, compared to what a middle-class person who has a health problem has to deal with, it's a pretty unrecognizable version of scarcity here. But, very conventional, right-wing economic gestures here. Graeber, sounding smooth in his lecture flow, great in his points, artful, charming, funny, handsome, so much better.
Yeah, I mean, the last 10 minutes or whatever of Graeber have been fantastic. I think, the John Lennon line really hit with me because I did in fact used to have a job that was literally lifting boxes in a warehouse, and Jesus, that was mind numbing. And like just repetitive motion, hour after hour after hour, and then you just want to go home and watch TV. But yeah, I mean, I think I think that actually helped me complain much less than a lot of people I knew did about graduate school, because it's like, I don't know, I mean, if the worst thing you have to do is like grade, and that's annoying, but like you can do that while you're lying down on the couch. That's
once you've had a shitty job or two, it does put like the version of toil you do when you're studying an intellectual in its place. Once you've worked a few night shifts, it's like, well,
yeah.
this book's boring, but the sun is up. It's not that bad. It's all right.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, no, the point about, like, I love the John Lennon thing. I mean, I love the stuff about the role of the welfare state and
artists are on the dole. That's great.
Yeah, exactly. And I liked the thing about universal basic income. I mean, even though, like, as like a specific policy, it depends on a lot of details or whatever, but that's not really the main point. That I think what I really like about that is that, he was, even though he didn't connect these dots super explicitly, he's finally pushing back on something that Thiel told him earlier in the conversation, which was, I'm afraid all your stuff is just going to lead to more bureaucracy. And it's like, well, hold up. If you really want to give what is it that gives bureaucrats their power, right? And this is a point that I pushed in the Kirk debate and did a Jackman article about later. It's like, bureaucrats have power because they get to decide who gets or doesn't get certain goods, right? That's the power of bureaucrats. Like, that they, I've looked over your case file, and you deserve help or you don't deserve help. That's the power that the bureaucrats have. And so the more sort of miserly and means tested public assistance is, the more power bureaucrats have in that system. That they've decided, whether you've cleared the bar to merit help or not. Whereas universal benefits, whether universal basic income or Medicare for all, tuition-free higher education, you've taken the bureaucrats out of the picture, right? And that if you move to a new town and you show up at the local school district to enroll your children, you're going to be talking to somebody who works in an office, right? They are a desk worker, a bureaucrat in the original strict sense. But they don't actually get to make a decision about whether your kid goes to school there. They have to, like, they have a legal obligation to educate every kid who lives in the district. So they don't have any power over you in that conversation, the way that a bureaucrat who's administering a means tested or otherwise restricted program does. So yeah, I love that. I love the experimentation point. right? Like, yeah, people, as you say, they talk about markets as a form of experimentation, but it's like, well, markets are, represent a certain, like sort of discipline, right? Things failing, experiments failing in a certain way, but like in terms of just creating conditions in which a wide variety of experiments can play out. I remember you pointed this out when we were reviewing Sam debating Yaron Brook, that Brook, Yaron is like bringing up all of these. It's like, oh, actually, it's only 0.01% or whatever of the of like government funded technological research things that pay off. It's like, yeah, dumbass, that's how science works. Like that. What do you think this is? Like, yeah, I mean, you try a bunch of things and most of them don't work out, right? I mean, a bunch of people try to become rock stars and most of them don't. But if you have a dole that they can live on, while they try, you're going to get a lot more experiments.
Yeah, and professional scientists, like they throw out a lot of bad hypotheses and a lot of failed expectations before they hit on something actually useful. Like, again, it's all based on having no idea, like how these things actually get developed. And, you just have to pay scientists. You can't pay them by the discovery because they never know when they're going to get one. And it's, who knows if it'll be valuable. Like there's reasons these things are institutionally supportive. And, it's just lame and invasive and unconvincing to kind of affect that. Yeah, And I remember, specifically Yaron saying with capitalism, you can experiment. Like the opposite is true. With capitalism, you can hustle nonstop and maybe cover your psychotic rent that your tyrannical landlord has tripled over the last year and a half. Like that's where you don't have that ability. Yeah, you need a UBI or a dole or something so that our goofy hippie kids can be working out the next folk fest craze or whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, Yaron, who he's a nice guy. I shouldn't have used the unkind description I just did, but he is a he is an endorser of some real sociopathic ideas. I mean, what he's saying there is, I mean, it's literally, man. I mean, as much as Scott Adams is not much better, it is literally the pointy haired boss in the old Dilbert cartoons, who like asked Dilbert why it is that the idea that it works is always the last one that they try. Shouldn't you do that one first?
It's philosophically by definition we stop when we find one that works. It's by definition the last one we try because you stop trying at that point. That's pretty great. And why doesn't Peter Thiel use his money to keep Dilbert in newspapers? There's another question. There's another question he's evading. That's definitely the most we're definitely gonna have flying cars faster if you hoard an immense amount of society's resources and you use it on shit like crushing media that displeased you with personal gossip. Oh my God. Why aren't you using this money to threaten these newspapers that you'll sue them and crush them unless they put Dilbert back in? Why don't we have flying cars? Why don't we have unfunny legacy print media? It's these are the real questions.
No, I mean, I mean, Peter Thiel asking why we don't have more, research in flying cars, given the amount of money he's sitting on. I mean, that really is the meme with Garfield looking at the no Garfield sign and being like, oh, who's that for? Like that's, who is it that's spending all this money on stuff that has nothing to do with getting flying cars?
The big capricious tyrant seeking rents. Something ought to be done.
Yeah, exactly.
For my human carried litter to transport me to my lobster salad.
Exactly. And I should also just say, so we started, you were talking about the limited resources and all that. And I'm not a big MMT guy. I don't necessarily say that everything they say is wrong, but I mean, I think that there's a certain kind of pop MMT talking points that are popular in parts of the left that I don't necessarily find super useful. But I know enough about it to know that Thiel is caricaturing it a little bit. He's I mean, Graeber absolutely is not going to deny that there are finite resources, right? But his point is going to be that saying you need to do, balanced budgets or whatever. That doesn't necessarily track the actual underlying resources that you're allocating. And putting the MMT point to one side, okay, yeah, you're right. There are finite resources, but you're going to start bringing this up when you start talking about student loan debt. And okay, I mean, we could have a society where you were charged tuition to go to high school, and so everybody turned 18 with a bunch of high school loan debt. Then we could have the same conversation. Well, I mean, it would be nice, of course, to pay for that, but what are you going to do? Resources are limited.
Resources are limited, and I need my $9 million personal helicopter so I can fly from the Hamptons into New York without being even briefly on the road with you slimy commoners. What about that? Why are these babies all being born and their parents have to pay the $10,000 hospital bill, birth tithing, or birth indenturement? These are the money's there. Visionaries like Thiel are just trying to show us the way, Ben.
Yeah, exactly. We could even dispense with all the entire discussion of MMT and all that, and any sort of disconnect between money and underlying resources. We could just frame the conversation entirely about money, and it's okay, fine. Yeah, let's just accept the balance constraint. There's every dollar you spend, you have taken with taxes. All right. Bernie Sanders' free college proposal was there was a pretty modest tax on Wall Street transactions that would have completely funded that. It's not actually that hard to, Mars colonies. Now we're starting to have a conversation about resources are scarce, right?
Yeah, kind of pie in the sky projects. What Clinton said about Bernie's policies is actually true about this Mars shit. It is sort of unicorn nonsense. It is sort of beyond what can realistically be promised. Everything Bernie proposed is shit that Britain's been doing for 30 years.
Yeah, exactly. Paying for college for everybody. It's oh, what? You mean I mean, Britain, before they reintroduced tuition, Germany, that's Finland, right?
Exactly. Made up imaginary places that don't really exist in the world. They're fun, whimsical, imaginary lands. Exactly. Made up places. Yeah, the comments are really funny. The chat comments are really funny tonight, people. You're distracting me with everything you're saying. Just stop it. It's fucking me up.
Fair enough. All right. Yeah, fair enough. All right, let's get back to the debate.
We're sort of cycling on this nonstop, but I always keep coming back to this is not the most constructive thing to be working on. I think the more constructive things are to figure out ways to do new things, and this is why I think even with all the excess hype in Silicon Valley, that's a little bit off. Even with the ways in which I'd like innovation, not just in bits but also in atoms, and there is some sense in which the financial era is over. That it sort of has hit a wall, and it's going to be this long deflationary period. They got a huge bailout in 08, 09, but the bonuses are slowly getting cut back, and the banks are slowly going to get shrunk and delevered. I think at this point it has shifted to Silicon Valley in a very powerful way, and I think this is actually a very hopeful development, because I think this is, people have actually figured out this is where you can make a difference. This is where you can actually change things.
Well, it's an interesting argument. I mean,
it's a description of what's going on.
In terms of the larger numbers, though, I mean, in terms of where the profits are coming from, it's still largely in the financial sector.
I would argue, you have to think all this is always about the future. Where do people think they will come from in the future? Where do people think careers will be made in the future? Where do they think they will have an opportunity to impact the world in the future? And there is a way in which Google has really displaced Goldman Sachs in a and again, you can say you don't like Google or something, but it is there's a way in which we've had this enormous shift to Silicon Valley. There are problems in Silicon Valley. I think we're not doing enough. I'm always of the but I think it is the place that is most about trying to do new things.
Certainly, that's true.
That is most about trying to create new forms in our society, and so that is a very hopeful trend.
Well, I guess the question, I mean, and you wanted something adversarial, so I'll throw this out. I guess the question is got to be, is Silicon Valley actually posing an alternative to that larger structure where you have a fusion of financial and sort of security?
No, not really. But I don't think. But I would argue that that's again, this is my political atheism, or maybe it's just I'm secretly working on behalf of the regime here, or something like this. But that is. But I think the way that you the thought is we're not going to change the structures. We're not going to change those things, and we will work on these on other things. You have companies like Airbnb, and sort of they're changing some of the urban regulations. Things like this do shift, and the education system is going to probably shift at some point with online courses, and so a lot of these things look like they're too small initially, but I do think they can grow into things that will really change our society. And this is always why as a libertarian I find myself working in technology rather than politics, because in politics I find you have to convince too many people, and I can never convince enough people to agree with me. It's too hard.
We'll see about that tonight. But you said you're maybe secretly working for the regime, but can you speak about Palantir?
Yeah, that's where I was going.
It's really not so secret. It's not really very secret, is it? I mean, you're working with CIA and the correct me if I'm wrong, but the U.S. Army and on
J.P. Morgan Chase.
J.P. Morgan, and I mean, your political agnosticism hasn't prevented you from.
Right, and that's where I was actually sort of going with this. Is it's one thing to say, okay, we're doing something else, but we're not trying to challenge the structure. But there's another thing, sort of using those technologies to actively reinforce the very structure, which is ultimately stifling creativity.
No, I think there are all sorts of concrete problems that we need to solve. SpaceX is working with. It works with the U.S. military to help get financing to launch satellites, and on the Palantir side, I do think that there is I do think there were some very big buildings that were blown up here in New York City, and as a libertarian, I don't think we should have had the response we did to those buildings blowing up, but you did all the mass movements, all the consciousness raising in the world did not stop us from getting the Patriot Act. The ACLU is always good at talking about civil rights. Once something bad happens, you never get, the protections go out the window right away. And so I actually.
Oh, is that what you get? Are you a dissatisfied customer of the ACLU, you fucking rich, blood-guzzling fiend? Are you displeased at their record? How about you cough up a couple $1 million, you wretched, godforsaken billionaire? Oh, they never get anything done. I'm going to call the manager of the ACLU for letting our rights get trampled on. Why don't you help, you ruling class asshole? Help! Help! I'm literally screaming help at him.
Yeah, I mean, you could pay for that, and you could pay for ACLU lawyers to sue the federal government instead of paying for lawyers to sue Gawker.
Yeah, there was money then. That is weird. What happened then? He must have just got paid that day or something.
Yeah, exactly. That was the first person who asked him for some cash. So, I mean, it was ridiculous. The way he's like, well, as a libertarian, I'm not crazy about it. It's like, no, but we literally just established that you work for the Bush, you own a company that largely existed off of Bush era surveillance state contracts. What are you talking about? You're just a passive or I don't know. Yeah, no, I'm a libertarian. I would have rather we didn't do all that stuff. Well, that's not what you were saying then, right?
Yeah,
what you were saying then.
I really think the thing that most gets on my nuts about libertarians, we've warmed to the subject many times down the years, man, but it's like when the chips are down, when they could like actually be helpful because some military imperialism is about to start, like on 9/11, you're like, that's when libertarians go like, well, I mean, I'll support it now. Like the one time when they could be like actually useful, they always fucking fold. And South Park does it. Well, we should go to Afghanistan episode. And this guy, at the time, he's like, well, we've got to defend ourselves. It's the president's clear about how we're standing tall. And now we're all far too, we're very detached. The Iraq went badly. So, we don't like Bush anymore. But the ACLU didn't stop it. Why didn't they stop it? They've got billions of dollars. I should think. Exactly. That was that. I don't know. That got me unhappy in the moment for some reason.
No,
the scotch has gone right to my
head. I mean, it is amazing that he's. I mean, like, I think probably the best defense you can give of Palantir is that it was probably shitty technology that didn't actually do very much for the surveillance state. Like that's I mean, so maybe he didn't do as much damage there as he was trying to. But like,
yeah, but only because of a failure on his own evil terms, though. Like,
you
have to admit to that to use that defense. But yeah, I'm sure he would.
I mean, because like they always, at least the scuttlebutt about it is like, yeah, it's like was it really analyzing raw intelligence the way that the marketing for it made it sound like, or was it basically like was it basically like a visualization tool, once the analysis had been done? Depending on who you ask, the answers to that are very different. Thiel had Palantir executives sort of essentially wink and do this, if somebody asked them about the assassination of Osama bin Laden, like to that they'd try to suggest that was their technology that let the that like led to the CIA, finding bin Laden. I think, again, at least if you read the Max Shafkin book, that's dubious. But yeah, I mean, if he didn't actually do all that much to help the surveillance state in the war on terror, that's just because he had a shitty product. That's not because he wasn't enthusiastic to help as much as he could and get paid as much as possible for it.
Because they failed to live up to their own corporate prospectus. It's not, from like a lack of wanting to. There's that. And two, you can always tell when people like have been rich or powerful for a long time because, they think that the really predictable stuff they say and really obviously self-serving opinions are like, they're not used to ever having them questioned or anything, So right here you've got, come on. Right now you've got Thiel saying, at the beginning he was saying, I want innovation. It seems like all the big innovations are over and we need innovation in, not in bits, but in atoms, he keeps saying, which he means, I think, like innovation that's, not in online systems and on your phone and platforms and stuff, which is understandable. But it's just like earlier, it's just such a crazy, embarrassing thing to say if you're here to evaluate what's happening in the sciences. I mean, this is 2014, but even, 8 years ago when this took place, like we were already entering the crazy era of change that genetics and biology are going through. From micro robots to gene editing technology, I mean, all that stuff was happening right then. And that's as change in, progress in the atoms of technology as it gets, like literally editing at the atomic scale, even, not even as a metaphor.
Well,
so again,
it's just like, I know we beat this point to death, but like, okay, innovation in atoms, not in bits. Like, like in other words, innovation in stuff like doing flying cars, not doing innovation in bits, like every single fucking thing that Peter Thiel has ever actually made any money from doing.
I, for example, am an emblem of. But it was even happening, like it is happening in biology now. It was happening then, and all he had to do was refer to that, and I would go, okay, he's keeping up with the literature. He's reading an abstract service where he gets the science journal abstracts or something. Nope. Nothing.
Yeah, no, right. I mean, although again, a point that Graeber has made several times, although I think he maybe could have pressed a little more, stridently to good effect, is like, yeah, the real innovation in atoms that was happening, so they're having this debate, was not happening in tech startups in Silicon Valley, right? They were all doing bits innovation.
That's true.
It was happening in research labs, in universities, a lot of them which were public and were in any case getting like National Endowment for Science and stuff grants to do the research with. I mean, that's where it was happening. I mean, this is
true.
I mean, even like medical innovation, right? I mean, I no longer remember the exact number, but I mean, this is one of the most striking statistics in the Lee Phillips, Mikhail Rozworski book, People's Republic of Walmart, that some absurdly high percentage of drug patents aren't for actual NMEs, new molecular entities. They're just for like slightly tweaking stuff so you can stamp your corporate brand on it. The vast majority, the vast majority of actual NMEs are developed in the public sector, for all the reasons we've been talking about.
Yeah, and all the stuff that's happening now with gene editing and so on. Like when you look at the science journals, it's all like international collaborations among big research universities, including UW, which is right near me. They're always in the forefront of this. And it's all National Institutes of Health grants, National Science Association grants, DARPA grants, universities, state pass-through education department dollars. Like the giant majority of it is public sector stuff. Once you have a sellable product, then a pharmaceutical company or a spinoff from Stanford will, fiddle with it and turn it into a gel cab and patent that shit. But yeah, it's just showing that this guy's like not really conversant with what's going on in the sciences. But when you're super rich, that no one's told Peter Thiel that, that's not right, Peter. There's big innovation in a field and you're embarrassing yourself. Who in his circles would say that to him? Anyone who is critical to him like that probably isn't in his little ass kissy circles anymore.
Yeah, right. I mean, everybody he ever talks to, including his husband, is literally an employee, or else is somebody who's coming to him as they're hoping to get some money from him, including good friend of the show, James O'Keefe, who got a bunch of Thiel money for Project Veritas, which
of course.
Which again, another non-flying car thing that he saw fit to devote some resources to, which is also hilarious because so there was a point during my debate with O'Keefe where I was being salty. I mean, I was pissed off for various reasons that we don't need to go back into, but but the moderator was actually trying to sort of let everything simmer down a little bit because things have been pretty contentious. And he threw me, I think, just a sort of nice, gentle softball question, which was, I don't even remember what the setup was, but it was like, well, how does Jacobin handle this? And I said some nice things about Jacobin. And then I said I'm much happier to be associated with an actual independent media organization instead of gutter level snitches like Project Veritas, and in the course of saying that, I said that's because it's actually an independent media organization. It's not beholden to wealthy donors. Stare at James O'Keefe, and he got really indignant about that. Right, that beholden to wealthy donors line. And it was great because he was like, he was just being so like, I have never, been instructed to do anything by a wealthy donor, and I would testify to that under oath.
Wow, under oath.
And
it's always some claim that no one made. I have
exactly.
never had a billionaire personally point at my face and say, "Don't say that." So
yeah, exactly. Because they
someone's
don't fucking
embarrassing
have
themselves.
to. If they had to, they wouldn't be giving you the money in the first place.
Yeah, why would they hire you if it came to that? You freaking and your beard is terrible. Just to add that.
Yeah, it's also a terrible beer.
That's I'm mad, so I'm getting personal.
But like, but it was also great because our friend Jason Miles was in the audience. You know, he got one of my comp tickets, and when O'Keefe said that, Jason yelled out, you know, heckled to the audience, "That's not how donors work." Right, like that's it's like, yeah, which is exactly that point, right? That it's like, no, they wouldn't be giving you all this money in the first place if they thought you were the kind of person they'd have to tell. They know what you're about, and you know that they know what you're about, and you know what's going to get the money continuing to flow, right? Nobody has to, you know, you wouldn't be good at this if anybody had to explain that to you. But like, there was a point where I actually said, I think at least once, maybe a couple times, I was like, okay, so are you saying you don't have big donors? And he never quite answered that part. He said a bunch of stuff about how many small donors they have, but it's like, well, that's not the question.
What the question was?
Yeah. Are you saying you don't have big donors?
No big donors. That's tough, bro. Oh no. Oh.
I think I even gave him. I think I even repeated that I just asked it. I think I was like, so. You know, I did just give them an opportunity to deny that they have wealthy donors. And then like after the debate, I looked up a bunch of the stuff. It's like, yep, Koch, Thiel, you know, all of the obvious, you know, evil.
Not small names. Yeah. That's
yeah, exactly.
Incredible. Yeah. I don't know. Well, yeah, this is amazing. Yeah. And the whole, and again, too, another empty thing earlier, Google has replaced Goldman Sachs. What the hell does that mean? No, it didn't. Goldman Sachs is still one of the most important, profitable firms in the United States. Wall Street and Silicon Valley are co-dominant. Anyone can see that. Like, they're like the two core sectors of our fucked up system, with you leeching off both teats, you weird, awful gentleman. I don't know. I've been enjoying. This has gotten better as it's continued. So I have high hopes for Graeber getting more good ones.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Also enjoy. I think we'd stopped too recently when he said it, but one of Graeber's best lines was under his breath, which was when Thiel said, "Well, maybe I'm secretly working for the regime," and Graeber was like, "Not secret."
Oh yes, I heard yes. Like, it's just a secret. What a secret! Yeah.
What's the secret? Like, you know, it's
secrets.
I also like that Thiel keeps saying atheism when he means agnosticism, and both Graeber and the moderator keep repeating it back as agnosticism, because that's obviously what he means.
Yeah, atheism is like there is no political system. There are no politics.
Yeah, it's like when politics doesn't exist.
No one can possibly think that. That's not an opinion.
Yeah, you must be in political agnosticism, because that's the closest word to atheism that would actually make sense. It's also bullshit. You clearly do have political opinions. You've been expressing them in this conversation.
Yeah.
You know, you try not to. You try to be like, oh, I don't know.
I'm post-politics, yes.
I don't know, man. We could have like an anarcho-communist revolution, but that'd be hard. Let's just focus on startups. He was trying to do that in the beginning, right? But then, like, when the MMT-ish stuff started to come up, then I think the politics came out a lot more clearly, and it became very clear very fast. He's not at all politically agnostic. That it's like, well, you know, economies are real and scarcities are real, so let's not be extending, you know, free public education for another few years, you know, because we definitely can't do that, right? I mean, we need that money to sue Gawker and colonize Mars.
Yeah, or have for more national security state money to sluice into my weird, inadequate spying software startup. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we stopped here because I got really pissed off about the ACLU thing. So we may come back in the middle of that.
I actually do think that there's something to be said for trying to figure out some ways to stop another attack, which will be used to curtail civil liberties a lot more. A company like PayPal could not get started in the post-Patriot Act world, because we would have been accused of money laundering in 99 to 2000. And so I do think the fact there was no technology to stop terrorism in 2001 is what has led to a far
Right,
far
another
less
reason.
libertarian world.
Another reason.
Yeah, that's
why,
my
yeah.
my understanding of it.
Right. I mean, another reason why 2001 happened is because all the intelligence resources were being brought to bear disproportionately on people like me, and my friend, rather than guys who are actually blow something up.
Look, it's look with you know, if Snowden has revealed anything about the NSA, it is how little technology there is, how incompetent it is. So, you know, if you have an intelligence agency where someone is downloading all the files, and it doesn't raise any suspicions whatsoever. And this is much more like the Keystone Cops than Big Brother. And so we've had a world where there's been not very much privacy, but not very much security either. And I think that and I think we could try to have more of both.
Is Palantir moving from Keystone Cops to Orwellian? Is that the
No,
idea?
no, we get Orwellian because of the Keystone Cops, because they know they're incompetent. They have to always do more and more. So so you just have to hoover up all the data in the whole world because you have no idea what you're doing.
Let's stop this portion of the program. Thank you very much. David, we'll take some questions.
Yeah, I just wanted to.
All right, we'll do our usual Stalinist thing and skip the Q&A. But yeah, that was interesting. I think like the first like half hour, 35 minutes, something like that. I feel like Graeber is like, yeah, parts of what he was saying were interesting. You know, it didn't really feel like he was pushing back against Thiel the way he should. And then there were like a good 20 minutes that I was pretty happy with.
Yeah, it seemed like he just took his time to warm up to, you know, I mean, everything at the beginning was perfectly interesting. I think he was just in pleasant academic lecture mode before he's like, oh, you know what? I'm supposed to be taking my fight to this asshole. Let's try something here that actually, it's like some real political economy juice to it that's antagonistic. That was a lot of fun, man. That was like everything I hoped for. You know, leftist gets the better of some cosmetic conservative billionaire. That's you do love to see it, you know. And with Kasparian, that bit with Prager too. Like that was a great appetizer for this. I love both of these. I give this 5 out of 5 Robs. They were good.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we'll definitely be covering more of the of Anna and Prager on Monday's show. I did just want to just 2 random thoughts about the last bits of Thiel there. One is I think Snowden revealed a little bit more than just that the NSA wasn't good at stopping him from leaking. Like one of the things that they revealed is that the NSA had been systematically spying on millions and millions of Americans without any sort of warrant, you know, hoovering up all this data. And, you know, that seems like I'm not denying there's an element of Keystone Cops, but I think there's more Orwell there than that he's acknowledging. Also, to the point about structures of power and why those might be relevant, and we shouldn't just ignore those and be political agnostics and just think about tech startups. Not, of course, that's what Peter Thiel has been doing in the last 8 years, to put it mildly. You know, he has not been ignoring politics, but like to the point about structures of power. I mean, this is the I wrote this article, came out last week, I think, for Jacobin about the Alex Jones trial, where one of the points that I made was part of the reason that, you know, the ecosystem in which parasites like Alex Jones can flourish is that, like, there's a built-in audience for any like crank or huckster who comes along telling you that the government is lying about everything, because, you know, gosh, where would they get that idea? That, like, I mean, obviously the alternative reality that somebody like Alex Jones supplies is insane, but the first thing that comes out of his mouth is the, you know, powerful people are lying to you about everything, that does have a certain aura of plausibility. like Alex Jones brings up WMD all the time because and another one of those is James Clapper, the director of the NSA, talked to Congress under oath and said, nope, we're definitely not spying on everybody. And then Edward Snowden comes along, reveals that they were in fact spying on everybody. And James Clapper had just committed perjury to Congress, and absolutely nothing happened. Clapper is still like an expert they'll trot out on CNN to comment on the news of the day. So yeah, I think the Snowden revelations were pretty significant. Also, like, the worst thing about the Patriot Act is that we wouldn't have fucking PayPal.
Yeah, it's money laundering. I wouldn't have been able to join the rent-seeking parasites on Wall Street. It would just be traditional finance taking a cut of every transaction in the universe, and not me also. So, there's another bad thing right there.
No,
you have to enter your credit card more often online.
Yeah, exactly. That is the difference. That is literally the difference between a world with PayPal and a world without PayPal, in terms of all of us who are not members of the PayPal mafia and aren't getting, money from that.
That's right.
I think, that would be what we would lose, is that we would have to enter in our credit card information more often. And I guess entering your credit card information is annoying, but that is I just kept thinking about the educational film in The Simpsons, come back, Zinc, come back, right? It's like, I'm just trying to imagine the nightmare somebody's having about what the world would be like without PayPal. It's like, come back, PayPal.
That's right. Without PayPal, you won't be able to click directly through to point of sale. You'll have to carefully enter a 16-digit number, then recheck your security code at a cost of some 45 seconds to you. But over the course of your lifetime, it's a minute and a half. So so he deserves a senator. That's reasonable. Yeah, I don't know.
Well,
that was.
He's trying. He got greedy this cycle, and he's trying to get himself 2 senators, Blake and JD. And at least JD is to a certain extent his own grifter. I mean, he wrote Hillbilly Elegy, and he marketed himself to the media as the self-hating hillbilly who could scold Trump voters before he reinvented himself as a Trump guy.
I love the crazy hillbillies. I defined my career in antagonism too. They were great, and everyone goes like, "Oh, he thinks it's great." Okay.
Okay, all right. Well, fair enough.
But Thiel probably get him in office. Watching Blake Masters go down in flames will be fun. At least we'll enjoy that next month. But
yeah, I mean, Blake Masters was just ridiculous because he's literally having he's literally just, it's like, oh, who am I going to run? I don't know, my guy Blake. I mean, I don't have to stick my head out of the office to find somebody else who's already here. I don't have any more books on startups for him to help me to write. Or I guess he's done about what he can for Founders Fund. I'll just farm him out to the Senate, see how that goes. So yeah, I think Blake will probably go down in flames, which will be nice at least.
It won't be a lot of fun that night, but hopefully he and Oz will lose, so we'll get that. So this is what you hope for. I mean, a billionaire who's underprepared, getting embarrassed by a beloved left intellectual. I also did love that it was all on those close shots, they did it at a library on a little simple event space, right behind them. There's just a bunch of library books with the old library. I don't know why. It's just, every day those books are there fun. And no one looks at them. And the little tiny amount of dust accumulates every day. And then for one evening, there's, a beloved intellectual and a billionaire sitting there. I don't know why. Those little moments I like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it is also funny, politics and corruption and all that stuff. I've mentioned this on here before, but a few months ago, I wrote an article about JD Vance for the Daily Beast, which was very easy to research. Now, this is not my own original research or anything. I mean, it was all sitting out there. This had been discovered, right, by other people, but it made it very easy for me to figure out the stuff I wanted to figure out about all of those horrible political positions, because in his primary campaign, he had other donors eventually, but like it was mostly Peter Thiel, right? And Thiel wanted to spend a lot more money on getting JD the nomination than you can do just from donations to the campaign finance laws being what they are. So of course, he did the he did the tried and true Post Citizens United thing and set up a JD Vance super PAC. So far, pretty standard. But because the actual campaign didn't have enough donors, the campaign itself was pretty cash strapped. So there were a lot of things that would normally be done in-house in the campaign that they had to farm out to the super PAC. And at this point, in terms of like Oppo research and stuff like that, and at this point, it gets a little tricky because campaign finance law being what it is, you're not like, okay, the pretense that campaigns and super PACs can't coordinate with each other is a little thin, but you can't just have the super PAC like email the campaign information every week, yes, or else you really would get into legal trouble, right? Like you can't do that. So if they were going to do this stuff, they had to like find some way that wasn't quite technically illegal to do it. So there were all these documents, crucially including this like 200-page thing, which was an analysis of JD Vance's political vulnerabilities that the super PAC put together. Now, remember, they can't just email all this stuff to the campaign because that would be illegal. So what they did is they put it on I think it was like a Medium site or something, but it was like some extremely minimalistic blog that they tried to design so nobody would like just find it in a search.
So the search engine de-optimized, they sub-optimized it.
Yeah, exactly. It was like and like essentially all it was a Dropbox link to this Dropbox, so they can slip a piece of paper or something with the like link, but there doesn't have to be any further communication after that. But of course, inevitably, the press did find it and wrote up some articles about it. So I could just search this fucking thing and be like,
best research the money could have bought. It's
exactly like, oh, let's see, what's he said about healthcare?
That is vulnerable.
Has this like opioid crisis nonprofit that he made a big show of setting up, have they actually spent any money on anything, or did they pretty much pocket that? Man, I wonder if this political vulnerabilities analysis says anything about that.
Oh my goodness, vulnerability levels increasing.
Yeah, so
that's fantastic.
Yeah, no, I mean my critique of Graeber and all this, like I said, I really like the last 20 minutes or so of Graeber. That was all fantastic.
You warmed up to it.
Yeah, for sure. Like my critique of him is that he's doing this sort of very Occupy Wall Street era anarchism where he's saying like, well, you don't want to bother trying to work within the political process and all this stuff. But then it's like, I don't know, man. I don't think you could avoid it. Peter Thiel certainly isn't. I think you gotta like engage on that battlefield, and especially like given all of these very good points you made in these last 20 minutes, like like when they cut the dole, right? That's because the Labor Party was being run by Tony Blair instead of Jeremy Corbyn. They like you could like that is a result of stuff that happened in the political process, and you want to stop that. I think you're going to have to engage with that. The state cannot be avoided. It has to be contested. That would be my one sectarian point about that. But all of the substantive points that he made in the last half of that were
pretty nice, impeccable academic left analysis there. Very nice. And we're all going to have our little left-wing schools and stuff. And Graeber, I mean, and people change over the course of their careers, and Graeber's advocated a few different things. So that's I really enjoyed that. That's great. We need more debates like these. We've done a lot of like William F. Buckley, like formal stuff. Like this is more like it. Like it's. Let me say this. My last big thought is like way to go, the Baffler. Like again, we said it before. Incredible. I am baffled. It worked. They win. I am baffled. I don't know how they did it. That's not bad. That's pretty impressive. So the bafflement. I was pleased by the level of bafflement.
Yes. Yeah. Bafflement, 10 out of 10. I don't think I've been more baffled since that. Since we watched that 1997 debate where Christopher Hitchens and Jesse Jackson were debating guys from the National Review about the death penalty. With Ed Koch moderating. That's like the only more baffling one I've ever seen.
Yeah, damn, that's pretty crazy too. And the one with Cardinal Dolan was pretty crazy.
Oh, wow, yeah. Okay.
Now that we start to think about it, a lot of these are kind of off the wall, I guess.
Yeah. But no,
this
is definitely top 5 bafflement going on here. All right. Speaking of debates, I have 2 of those coming up. So on the show on Monday, have Nate Hochman, who works for the National Review, is gonna come on. So that should be interesting. I put out a call a little while ago. This is haven't done enough debate episodes lately. And he's one of the people who took me up on it. Monday, exactly, Bisquick. I have not actually listened to it yet. I've heard good things about the. So for Chapo Trap House episode 666, because that's what they just came to. They did a whole thing that was set in hell. And part of it was Christopher Hitchens being very skeptical that he was actually in hell, and I don't think this is hell. And I think one of his objections from the description I heard, I haven't listened to it yet, was that this can't be hell because Mother Teresa isn't here. So yeah, got to check that out. But yeah, Nate Hochman on Monday. And speaking of Peter Thiel and the various non-flying cars things that he spends his money on, in person in Chicago on October 22nd, I am going to be doing a debate with one Curtis Yarvin, who I guess deserves some credit for agreeing to that, despite the fact that in that Peter Thiel article that I put up the graphic of earlier, that I did in Jacobin, I refer to Yarvin in there as a monarchist weirdo. So either he didn't read that and mentioning it on air might fuck this up, or else he has a thick skin. But in any case, that's. Is very close to the October 23rd LA event. I already have my ticket. I'm gonna the night after I do the debate, later that night, I'm gonna fly to LA. So I'll be getting into LA at about 11 p.m. Pacific, and then we'll be doing the live show on Sunday the 23rd, which again I'm really looking forward to. Should be a lot of fun. A whole bunch of my favorite people are going to be in the same room. I did one of these for TMBS, Michael Brooks show, just before the world lockdown in 2020, and it was a blast. So I'm looking forward to doing one doing one for this show and the co-sponsors. This is Revolution and Left Reckoning. Should be a lot of fun. Really looking forward to all that stuff. You should be reading Rob at Current Affairs. You should be reading his books.
Yeah.
Bit Tyrants, etc. If you what's the new one?
Next book. Got a contract with Haymarket to write it. I really should be working on that. I got a book on the ruling class and its crazy amount of wealth as the ruling class returns to the Gilded Age levels of wealth concentration. I'm just doing a short book with like a chapter on the money and a chapter on the lifestyle, a chapter on their carbon emissions, a chapter on peacefully organizing to remove their control over the economy and society and not cutting their heads off. I was just kidding about that earlier. and that's called Mastering the Universe. I'm hoping to have it come out in 2024. I figure that's the next good year to have a book come out. So
Nice. Well, you should, while you're waiting for that, you should read his previous books, some of which are very relevant to a lot of what we've been talking about tonight, about how Silicon Valley is wonderful for technological innovation, and definitely not just definitely not just extracting monopoly rents.
And last thing I had in last article I had was in Jacobin, just a review of Paris Marx's book Road to Nowhere on Elon Musk and Uber and related Silicon Valley scumbags. And his book's really fun. It was really enjoyable. You should check out that review and get a sense of what his book's about, and check it out if it sounds cool.
Nice. Yeah, Elon Musk and Silicon Valley don't know how to fix the transportation system.
Indeed.
All right, nice. Well, we will, I guess, cut this off here for tonight. But we'll see people back here on Monday. I will see Rob very soon. Left is best.